The Duke of Valcrest is burning, not in flames, but in silence, the kind that eats empires from the inside out. Tonight, Adrian Voss will stand before 200 guests and realize that the mind behind every victory he's ever claimed just walked out the door. And she didn't slam it. She closed it so quietly, no one even heard the lock turn. But in 3 days, when his enemies strike and he reaches for the brilliance that's kept him untouchable for 5 years, he'll find nothing. Just air, just ruin, just the echo of a woman he never bothered to see. Stay with me. Because this isn't a love story that ended, it's a war that just began. And if you want to see how far a woman can fall before she stops falling and starts flying, you need to hear what happened in that ballroom. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. And buckle up, because Evelyn Hartwell doesn't forgive. She calculates. The chandeliers were too bright. Evelyn Hartwell stood at the top of the grand staircase, fingers resting lightly on the marble balustrade, and watched the light refract through 1,000 crystals like shattered glass. Below her, the ballroom churned with bodies, silk gowns, medals glinting on dress uniforms, laughter that sounded rehearsed. The winter gala, the event of the season. The night Adrian had promised would be important. He hadn't said why. She knew now. Her husband stood at the center of the room, one hand resting on the small of another woman's back. The woman was young, blonde, draped in emerald silk that probably cost more than Evelyn's entire wardrobe, and she was laughing at something Adrian said, tilting her head back in that practiced way that made men feel clever. Evelyn's chest didn't tighten, her hands didn't shake. She'd cried all her tears 3 months ago, in a locked study, clutching decoded intelligence reports, while Adrian accepted medals for strategies she'd written. Tonight, she just watched. "Lady Voss," the voice came from her left. Lord Pembroke, silver-haired and smiling in that oily way that meant he wanted something. He always wanted something. Lord Pembroke. Evelyn didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the ballroom floor, on Adrian's hand, on the way it moved, familiar, possessive, across the emerald silk. "You're not dancing. I'm observing." "Ah." Pembroke stepped closer. She could smell brandy and something floral, probably from whatever widow he'd cornered earlier. "The Duke seems occupied." There it was. The probe. The carefully phrased invitation to scandal. Evelyn turned her head just enough to meet his gaze, and she watched his smile falter. "My husband is greeting guests," she said evenly. "As he should." Pembroke's eyes darted away. "Of course. Forgive me, Lady Voss, I only meant—" "You meant exactly what you said, Lord Pembroke, but I'm not interested in gossip tonight." He retreated. They always did. Evelyn Hartwell had perfected the art of being present without being seen, polite without being warm. 5 years of marriage to Adrian Voss had taught her that much. You could stand in a room full of people and still be invisible, as long as you didn't make noise. She descended the staircase slowly, each step deliberate. Her gown was silver, understated, elegant, forgettable. Adrian had picked it out, or rather, his valet had, at Adrian's instruction. Something appropriate, he'd said that morning, barely glancing up from his correspondence. Nothing that draws attention. Nothing that competed with emerald silk. The ballroom swallowed her. She moved through clusters of conversation, catching fragments, trade routes, border disputes, the unrest in the northern provinces. All of it familiar. She'd written half the policy briefs these men were discussing, decoded the intelligence that shaped their opinions. But when they saw her, they smiled and said things like, "Lady Voss, how lovely you look," and then turned back to their conversations as if she'd never spoken. Because she rarely did. Evelyn reached the edge of the room and paused near a column, half hidden in shadow. From here, she had a clear view of Adrian. He was holding court now, surrounded by generals and ministers. The blonde woman had stepped back, but not far. She stood just outside the circle, close enough to be noticed, close enough to matter. "Did you see the northern dispatches?" General Crane was saying, his voice carrying over the music. "Brilliant strategy. Absolutely brilliant. Whoever drafted that containment plan deserves a commendation." Adrian smiled. That particular smile, modest, confident, utterly false. The situation required a delicate touch. We couldn't afford a prolonged engagement. Evelyn's nails dug into her palm. She'd written that plan. Every line, every contingency. She'd spent 4 sleepless nights analyzing troop movements, supply lines, weather patterns. She'd factored in the tribal alliances, the terrain advantages, the psychological impact of a swift surgical strike. And when she'd finished, she'd left the report on Adrian's desk, as she always did. Unsigned, uncredited. He'd presented it to the War Council the next morning as his own. And the cipher modifications? That was Lord Ashford, leaning in with the eagerness of a man who sensed opportunity. I heard you personally redesigned the entire communication network. A necessary evolution, Adrian said smoothly. Our enemies were getting too comfortable. We needed something unpredictable. Evelyn almost laughed. Unpredictable. The cipher system that had taken her 8 months to build from scratch, integrating polymorphic substitution with temporal keying, a design so complex that even the encryption officers didn't fully understand how it worked. They just followed her instructions. And Adrian had signed his name to the implementation order. Remarkable, Ashford murmured. Truly remarkable. Adrian inclined his head, accepting the praise like it was air. Natural. Expected. His gaze swept the room briefly, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, it landed on Evelyn. She didn't move, didn't react. His eyes passed over her like she was furniture. Then he turned back to Crane, already deep in conversation about artillery placements. Evelyn stepped further into the shadow. He doesn't even see you, does he? The voice was soft, female, threaded with something that might have been pity. Evelyn turned. The woman standing beside her was older, perhaps 50, wearing a gown of deep burgundy that looked expensive but not showy. Lady Marguerite Thorne, widow of the late Admiral Thorne. Sharp eyes, sharper mind, one of the few women in Adrian's circle who'd actually earned her place. Lady Thorne, Evelyn kept her voice neutral. You don't have to pretend with me, dear. Marguerite glanced toward Adrian, then back. I've been watching you watch him. For years now. Evelyn said nothing. You're smarter than all of them, Marguerite continued quietly. Everyone knows it, or they would if they bothered to look. But Adrian's built his entire reputation on making sure they don't. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Marguerite's tone wasn't unkind, but it wasn't gentle either. And if you don't leave him soon, he'll destroy you. Not because he hates you, because he needs you too much. Evelyn's throat tightened. You're mistaken. Am I? Marguerite tilted her head. Then tell me, who wrote the Kestrel Accord? Who designed the Southern trade embargo structure? Who solved the supply chain crisis last winter when half the northern garrisons were 3 days from mutiny? Silence. I thought so. Marguerite touched Evelyn's arm briefly, a fleeting contact. Be careful, Lady Voss. Men like Adrian don't let go of their weapons, even when they're pointed at themselves. She drifted away, leaving Evelyn alone with the column and the music and the weight of 5 years pressing down like iron. The library was dark when Evelyn finally escaped. She'd stayed at the gala exactly as long as protocol demanded. 2 hours, 1 glass of champagne she didn't drink, polite smiles for people whose names she'd forgotten before they walked away. Adrian hadn't spoken to her once. He'd been too busy with the blonde woman, whose name, Evelyn had learned from a passing servant, was Lady Isolde Crane, the general's niece. 23 years old, new to court. Perfect. Evelyn closed the library door behind her and leaned against it, letting the darkness settle. The room smelled like leather and old paper, familiar and grounding. This was her space, the one place in the sprawling Voss estate where she could think without interruption. She crossed to the desk in the corner, her desk, though no one called it that, and lit a single lamp. Warm light pooled across the surface, illuminating stacks of documents, maps, coded correspondence. The hidden work, the invisible architecture of Adrian's success. Her hands moved automatically, pulling open the bottom drawer. Inside, beneath a false bottom she'd installed herself, lay a leather portfolio. She lifted it carefully, almost reverently, and set it on the desk. This was the proof. 5 years of documentation. Letters in her handwriting, drafts covered in her corrections, intelligence analyses annotated in her cipher shorthand, dates, times, witnesses, carefully compiled, meticulously organized. Everything Adrian had claimed as his own, traced back to its true source. Her. Evelyn opened the portfolio and stared at the top page. A military strategy brief for the Eastern Front, dated 18 months ago. Adrian had presented it to the king himself, earning a commendation and a promotion to the War Council. The king's own signature graced the bottom of the ceremonial copy, framed in Adrian's study. Evelyn's draft, the real one, bore coffee stains and margin notes in 3 different inks. She'd rewritten the 3rd section 4 times before finding an approach that balanced aggression with political caution. "You're nothing without me," she whispered. The words felt strange in her mouth. Foreign. She'd never said them aloud before. Never let herself think them, really. Because if she acknowledged the truth, that Adrian's entire career rested on her uncredited work, then she'd also have to acknowledge what that made her. A fool. No, not a fool. A strategist who'd made a miscalculation. Evelyn closed the portfolio and returned it to its hiding place. Then she sat very still, hands folded on the desk, and let her mind work. Marguerite's warning echoed in her skull. Men like Adrian don't let go of their weapons. He wouldn't let her leave. Not willingly. Not when her absence would expose him as a fraud. He'd fight. He'd manipulate. And if manipulation didn't work, he'd escalate. How far would he go? The question hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn stood and moved to the window. Below, carriages were beginning to depart from the gala, lanterns swaying in the cold night air. She pressed her palm against the glass, feeling the chill seep through. She needed information, proof of his intentions, evidence she could use to protect herself. Her gaze drifted to the desk again, to the locked drawer where Adrian kept his private correspondence. She'd never opened it before, never needed to. But tonight, footsteps in the hall. Evelyn froze. The footsteps were deliberate, unhurried. She knew that gait. Adrian. She moved quickly, extinguishing the lamp and slipping behind the heavy drapes near the window. The library door opened. Lamplight spilled in, cutting through the darkness. "Absolutely secure," Adrian was saying. His voice was tight, controlled. "No one else knows." "You're certain?" Another voice. Male, unfamiliar. "I've handled it personally." Evelyn held her breath. Through a gap in the drapes, she could see Adrian standing near the center of the room, another man beside him. The stranger was shorter, balding, dressed in dark formal wear, not military, a lawyer maybe, or a physician. "And Lady Voss?" the stranger asked carefully. Adrian's expression didn't change. "She won't be a problem. Forgive me, Your Grace, but your wife is known to be intelligent. If she suspects, she won't." Adrian's tone was flat, final. "Evelyn doesn't suspect anything. She never does. She's too focused on her books and her charity work to notice what's happening around her." Evelyn's pulse roared in her ears. "And if she does?" the stranger pressed. Adrian turned, and for a moment his face caught the lamplight fully. His expression was cold, empty. "Then we proceed with the contingency plan. The documentation is ready. Dr. Whitmore has already signed the preliminary assessment." "An assessment of what?" "Diminished capacity." Adrian's voice was clinical, detached. "Nervous exhaustion leading to delusional episodes. It's a tragic situation, but the family will of course ensure she receives the best possible care." Silence. "You mean to have her declared insane?" the stranger said slowly. "I mean to protect my household from scandal." Adrian adjusted his cuffs, a gesture Evelyn had seen 1,000 times. Evelyn has become erratic, withdrawn. If she were to make unfounded accusations, it would be cruel to allow her to embarrass herself publicly. Better to handle it privately, discreetly. And the estate? Reverts entirely to my control, as per the marriage contract. She'll be well cared for, naturally, a private facility in the countryside. Very comfortable, very secure. "Secure," the stranger repeated. The word hung heavy. "I need her gone, Harrington, but it has to be done correctly. No whispers, no questions. Just a quiet transition from troubled wife to tragic invalid." Adrian moved toward the door. "Dr. Whitmore will conduct a formal evaluation next week. After that, the legal proceedings will be straightforward." "Next week," Harrington followed. "That's quite soon. It needs to be soon before she—" Adrian stopped himself. "Before the situation worsens." They left. The door closed. Darkness returned. Evelyn didn't move. Couldn't move. Her legs felt like water, her chest like stone. The words echoed, fracturing and reforming in her mind. diminished capacity, delusional episodes, private facility. He was going to erase her. Not kill her. That would be too obvious, too risky. But erase her just the same. Lock her away where no one would hear her protests, where her intelligence would be dismissed as illness, where she'd disappear into bureaucratic paperwork and medical records no one would ever question. And then he'd continue, using her work, building on her strategies, taking credit for brilliance that came from a woman he'd buried alive. Evelyn stepped out from behind the drapes. Her hands weren't shaking. Her breath was steady. The fear that should have paralyzed her was gone, burned away by something hotter, sharper. Clarity. Adrian had made a mistake. He'd assumed she was weak, passive, blind. He'd forgotten who taught him to win. Evelyn crossed to her desk and pulled out the hidden portfolio again. This time, she didn't just look at it. She studied it. 5 years of evidence, 5 years of leverage. But it wasn't enough to just possess the truth. She needed to deploy it, strategically, devastatingly. And she needed to be gone before he realized what was happening. 1 week, that's what Adrian had said. 7 days before Dr. Whitmore's evaluation. Evelyn opened a drawer and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. She picked up her pen, the good one, the one she used for final drafts, and began to write. Not a plea, not an accusation, a battle plan. By 3 in the morning, the plan had shape. Evelyn sat surrounded by papers, maps of the estate, staff schedules, carriage routes, copies of legal documents she'd quietly accumulated over the years. Everything she needed to disappear without leaving a trail. The first challenge was physical escape. The Voss estate sprawled across 200 acres, surrounded by high walls and patrolled gates. Adrian had designed the security himself, or rather she had, back when she'd still believed they were partners. She knew every guard rotation, every blind spot, every weakness in the system she'd built. The main gate was impossible. Too visible, too controlled, but the eastern wall backed onto the thornwood forest, and there was a drainage culvert that ran beneath the wall itself. It had been installed 3 years ago to manage runoff from the spring rains. Evelyn had reviewed the engineering plans personally. The culvert was narrow, uncomfortable, but passable. She'd need provisions. Money. She had a small amount hidden in the library, coins saved from her household allowance over the years. Clothes, traveling clothes, not the silk gowns that marked her as Lady Voss. Papers, identity documents, letters of introduction, anything that would let her move without Adrian's name shadowing her. And the portfolio, the proof. She couldn't leave without it. Evelyn checked the clock. Dawn was hours away. Adrian wouldn't return from his rooms until late morning. He never did after the galas, preferring to sleep off the wine and politics. She had time. She moved through the manor like a ghost, gathering what she needed. A plain wool dress from the servants' quarters. She'd borrowed it months ago when she'd first started planning contingencies. A traveling cloak, sturdy boots, a small leather satchel for essentials. In the kitchen, she wrapped bread, cheese, dried meat, enough for 3 days if she rationed carefully. A water flask. Matches. Back in the library, she packed the portfolio, securing it in an oilskin wrap to protect it from the elements. She added her personal journals, coded of course, but containing observations and strategies Adrian would kill to possess, or to destroy. Then she paused. On the desk sat a single sheet of parchment, her final letter to Adrian. She'd written it an hour ago, and now she read it again, making sure every word carried the weight she intended. Adrian, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't bother looking. You designed the security here, but I built it. I know its flaws better than you ever will. You once told me I was your greatest asset. You were right, but assets only have value as long as they're controlled. And you stopped controlling me the moment you stopped seeing me. Everything you've accomplished in the last 5 years, every strategy, every victory, every commendation came from me. The Kestrel Accord, the Northern Containment Plan, the Cipher System, all mine, and I have proof. Dates, drafts, documents in my handwriting, enough to destroy your reputation entirely. But I'm not interested in destruction. Not yet. I'm leaving that choice to you. If you pursue me, if you try to implement your contingency plan, if you send Dr. Whitmore or anyone else after me, I will release everything, every letter, every strategy brief, Every piece of evidence that proves the Duke of Valcrest is a fraud. If you let me go, if you accept that your weapon has left the battlefield, I'll stay silent. You can continue your career, rebuild your own strategies, learn to win without me. I'm giving you a choice, Adrian. It's more than you ever gave me. E. Evelyn folded the letter carefully and placed it on Adrian's desk in the study, where he'd find it when he woke. Then she returned to her room one last time. She stood in the doorway, looking at the space she'd inhabited for 5 years. The elegant bed she'd rarely shared with her husband. The vanity where she'd learned to make herself beautiful in ways that didn't threaten. The bookshelves filled with volumes she'd read in the long, quiet hours when Adrian was away winning wars with her words. Nothing here was hers. It had all been borrowed, temporary. She turned away without regret. The manor was silent at 4:30. Evelyn moved through the darkened hallways, every step measured, every sound considered. She'd timed the guard rotations down to the minute. The eastern corridor would be empty for exactly 6 minutes while the patrol shifted positions. She had 4. The servants' entrance led to a narrow staircase that descended to the lower levels. Storage rooms, wine cellars, maintenance tunnels. Evelyn knew them all. She'd explored them during her first year at the estate, back when she'd still believed her marriage might become something real, something equal. Back when she'd still thought Adrian might see her. The tunnels smelled like damp stone and old earth. Her lamp cast flickering shadows on the walls as she navigated the passages, moving deeper underground. The air grew colder. She pulled her cloak tighter. The culvert entrance was hidden behind a stack of rotting crates in the farthest cellar. Evelyn set down her lamp and began moving the crates aside, working quickly but carefully. Splinters caught at her gloves. Her shoulders ached. Behind the crates, the culvert opening yawned dark and wet. Water trickled somewhere in the depths, a constant whisper. The opening was smaller than she remembered from the engineering drawings. Much smaller. Evelyn knelt and peered inside. The tunnel stretched away into blackness, barely wide enough for her shoulders. She'd have to crawl. On her belly. For at least 50 yards. She thought about turning back. Thought about Adrian's face when he realized she was gone. Thought about Dr. Whitmore and his preliminary assessment and the private facility where brilliant women went to die slowly. Then she thought about Isolde Crane's emerald dress and Adrian's hand on her back and 5 years of silence and invisibility and stolen credit. Evelyn pulled off her cloak. It would be too bulky, and tied it to her satchel. She checked the oilskin wrap protecting the portfolio. Then she lowered herself into the culvert, feet first, and began to crawl. The tunnel was worse than she'd imagined. Water soaked through her dress within seconds, icy and filthy. The walls pressed against her shoulders. Stones scraped her elbows. She had to keep her head tilted sideways to fit, and even then, rough edges caught at her hair. She counted as she moved. 1 yard, 2, 5, 10. Her lamp had been left behind, too dangerous to carry through water. She navigated by touch and memory and desperate calculation. The tunnel curved slightly to follow the natural drainage flow. If she'd read the plans correctly, the exit would be... Her hand met open air. Evelyn pushed forward, wriggling like a snake, until her upper body cleared the tunnel mouth. She grabbed at roots and rocks, pulling herself free. Her dress was shredded, her arms bleeding from a dozen scrapes, but she was out, on the other side of the wall. She lay in the mud for a moment, breathing hard, staring up at the sky. Dawn was breaking, pale gray light filtering through the trees. She was in the thornwood forest, exactly where she'd planned. Free. Evelyn stood slowly, testing her legs. They held. She retrieved her satchel, checked the portfolio, still dry, still secure, and oriented herself. South. She needed to go south, away from the estate, away from Adrian's reach. The forest swallowed her quickly, darkness and branches closing overhead. Behind her, the Voss estate rose like a monument to power built on lies. She didn't look back. By noon, she'd covered 6 miles. Her feet were blistered, her dress was ruined, and she was fairly certain she'd picked up at least 1 leech from the stream she'd crossed an hour ago. But she was moving. Away. Forward. The forest began to thin near the southern edge, giving way to farmland and scattered villages. Evelyn paused at the tree line, studying the landscape. She needed to reach the coaching road without being seen, then find transport south to the port cities. From there, She hadn't decided yet. Another country, maybe. Somewhere Adrian's name carried less weight. A wagon appeared on the road below, drawn by two tired horses. The driver was elderly, hunched over the reins. Evelyn waited until the wagon drew closer, then stepped out of the trees. The driver pulled up, squinting at her. "Miss, you all right?" Evelyn glanced down at herself. Muddy, torn dress, bleeding arms, hair tangled with leaves. She probably looked like she'd been attacked by wolves. "I'm fine," she said, keeping her voice steady. "My carriage had an accident several miles back. I need to reach the next town." The driver's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What kind of accident?" "The wheel broke. My driver went for help, but I couldn't wait. I have business to attend to." "Business?" The driver looked her over again. "You don't look like business folk." Evelyn met his gaze directly. "I'll pay double the standard fare. In advance." That changed the calculation. The driver nodded slowly. "Climb up then. But no trouble." "No trouble," Evelyn agreed. She settled onto the wagon bed, grateful to be off her feet. The driver clicked his tongue, and the horses lurched forward. The coaching road stretched ahead, rutted and dusty. Evelyn leaned back against a crate, closed her eyes, and let herself breathe. She'd done it. The first phase was complete. Now came the hard part. Staying gone. 3 days later, in a hired room above a tavern in the port town of Ashford, Evelyn received her first piece of intelligence. The woman who brought it was unexpected, a middle-aged courier with sharp eyes and a knowing smile. She handed Evelyn a sealed letter and refused payment. "From Lady Thorne," was all she said before disappearing back into the street. Evelyn broke the seal carefully. "Lady Voss? Or should I say, Miss Hartwell? I suspect you've reclaimed your maiden name by now. I won't ask where you are. I won't ask how you managed to slip past security that would make a prison warden jealous. But I will tell you this. Adrian found your letter 2 hours after you left. He tore his study apart looking for the portfolio you mentioned. When he realized you'd taken it, he locked himself in his rooms for an entire day. Then he called for Dr. Whitmore. I'm told the doctor was confused. The evaluation was scheduled for next week, after all. But Adrian insisted it happen immediately. He had paperwork drawn up. Declarations. Commitments. Everything needed to have you declared incompetent and institutionalized. There's just one problem. You're not there. He sent men to look for you. Quietly, of course. He can't risk a scandal, but they're looking, and Adrian is not a man who handles loss well, especially when the loss makes him look foolish. Be careful, Evelyn. You took his sword when you left, but he still has allies, and desperate men do desperate things. I'll send word if I hear anything useful. Until then, stay invisible. Imsa Thorne. Evelyn set the letter down and stared at the wall. So it had begun. The hunt, the scramble, the realization that the engine driving the Duke of Valcrest's success had simply stopped. She wondered how long it would take before Adrian's carefully constructed reputation began to crack. Days? Weeks? He was intelligent enough to mimic her strategies for a while, using the pattern she'd established. But without her analysis, her constant flow of intelligence, her ability to see connections others missed, he'd fail. Eventually. And when he did, everyone would wonder how the great Duke Voss had lost his edge so completely. Evelyn pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began to write. Not a letter. Notes, plans, a careful accounting of her next moves. She had the proof. She had her freedom. Now she needed leverage, power, something that would make Adrian think twice before coming after her. She needed allies, and she knew exactly where to find them. Evelyn dipped her pen and smiled, a small, cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. Adrian had taught her to be invisible. Now she'd teach him what invisible meant. The port city of Ashford smelled like fish and opportunity. Evelyn had been there 5 days now, long enough to learn the rhythm of the docks, the patterns of the merchants, the whispers that moved through taverns like currency. She'd traded her ruined dress for plain working clothes, a gray wool skirt, a white blouse, a dark jacket that made her look like a clerk or a governess. Nothing remarkable, nothing that drew eyes. She'd also started asking questions. Not about Adrian, not directly. That would have been stupid. Instead, she asked about shipping routes, trade agreements, military contracts. She listened to dock workers complain about delayed shipments. She bought drinks for customs officers who liked to talk about their frustrations with bureaucracy. She read every newspaper she could find, scanning for patterns, for fractures in the systems Adrian helped maintain. And she found them. The northern provinces were unstable. She'd known that already, had written the strategies to contain the unrest. But what she hadn't known, what Adrian had carefully kept from her, was that the instability was spreading, faster than anyone wanted to admit. The tribal alliances she'd factored into her containment plan were fracturing. New leaders were emerging. And they weren't interested in negotiation, which meant Adrian's carefully constructed peace was about to collapse, without her to rebuild it. Evelyn sat in her rented room now, maps spread across the small table, making notes in the margins. She'd bought the maps from a cartographer near the docks. Old editions, but detailed enough. She traced supply routes with her finger, calculating timelines, identifying pressure points. There, the Rendall Pass. A critical supply corridor feeding 3 northern garrisons. If that pass were blocked, by weather, by attack, by accident, those garrisons would be cut off within 2 weeks. Vulnerable. Isolated. Adrian would scramble to respond. He'd pull together whatever advisors he had left, demand solutions, probably throw resources at the problem in that blunt, expensive way he preferred when he didn't actually understand the situation. But he wouldn't see the larger pattern. He never did. He saw tactics, not strategy, pieces, not the whole board. Evelyn closed her eyes and let herself think like Adrian for a moment. What would he do? He'd reinforce the pass, send engineers, maybe a battalion, shore up the defenses. It was the obvious move. It was also wrong. The pass wasn't the real problem. The pass was a symptom. The real problem was the tribal coalition forming in the Eastern Highlands. A coalition she'd identified 6 months ago and warned Adrian about in a report he'd filed and forgotten. That coalition was growing, and if they decided to move against the pass, no amount of reinforcement would stop them. Not without addressing the underlying grievances that made them willing to fight in the first place. Adrian didn't know how to address grievances. He knew how to apply force. Evelyn made a note. Rendall Pass vulnerable within 30 days. Coalition likely to strike during spring thaw. Recommend immediate diplomatic engagement with Highland leaders, not military escalation. Then she sat back and stared at what she'd written. She could send this to someone. Lady Thorne, maybe. Or directly to the War Council, anonymously. One letter and she could prevent a disaster. But why should she? Adrian had stolen her work for 5 years. He'd planned to have her declared insane, locked away, erased. He'd touched another woman's back in public while his own wife stood invisible on a staircase. Why should she save him now? The answer came immediately, cold and clear. Because the soldiers in those garrisons didn't deserve to die for Adrian's incompetence. Because the tribal families in the Highlands didn't deserve to be crushed by a war that could be prevented. Because Evelyn Hartwell, or whatever she was calling herself now, wasn't the kind of person who let innocent people burn just to watch a guilty man suffer. She hated that about herself sometimes. Evelyn folded the map carefully and tucked it into her satchel. Then she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing a letter. Not to Lady Thorne this time, to someone else. Someone who might actually use the information. General Marcus Aldrin, commander of the Northern Forces. A man Adrian despised because Aldrin had once questioned one of Adrian's strategies in open council. The strategy had been Evelyn's, and it had been sound, but Adrian had taken the questioning as a personal insult. Aldrin, Evelyn suspected, might be willing to listen to an anonymous intelligence source if the information was good enough. She wrote quickly, laying out the situation in crisp military language. No emotion, no accusations, just facts, analysis, and recommendations. She signed it with a pseudonym, E. Hart, and sealed it with plain wax. Tomorrow she'd pay a courier to deliver it, discreetly. Tonight, she needed to focus on her own survival. Because Lady Thorne's warning had been clear, Adrian was hunting her, and desperate men did desperate things. A knock at the door made her freeze. Evelyn's hand moved instinctively to the small knife she'd bought from a blacksmith 3 days ago. It wasn't much, barely 6 inches, more of a tool than a weapon, but it was sharp, and it was hers. "Who is it?" she called, keeping her voice steady. "Message for Miss Hart." Miss Hart. The name she'd given the tavern keeper. Evelyn relaxed slightly, but kept the knife in her hand as she crossed to the door. She opened it a crack. The messenger was young, maybe 16, wearing the livery of a commercial courier service. He held out a sealed envelope. "Paid delivery, miss. No reply needed." Evelyn took it, gave him a coin, and closed the door. She waited until his footsteps faded down the hall before breaking the seal. The handwriting inside was elegant, precise, unfamiliar. "Miss Hart, we have a mutual acquaintance who suggested you might be interested in certain opportunities. I represent a consortium of investors concerned about recent instabilities in northern trade. We believe your particular expertise could be valuable in navigating these challenges. If you're interested in discussing this further, I'll be at the Copper Anchor tomorrow evening at 8. Come alone. Ask for Mr. Varon. This conversation could be mutually beneficial, or it could remain hypothetical. The choice is yours." V. Evelyn read the letter twice, then held it over the candle flame until it caught fire. She dropped it into the wash basin and watched it curl into ash. Mutual acquaintance. That had to be Lady Thorne. No one else knew she was here, knew the name she was using. A consortium of investors. That could mean anything. Legitimate merchants, black market smugglers, foreign agents, or just a group of wealthy men looking to profit from chaos. Or it could be a trap. Adrian's men trying to flush her out. Evelyn wiped the ash from her fingers and returned to the table. She pulled out a separate sheet of paper and began making calculations. Risk versus reward. If this was legitimate, if these investors actually wanted her expertise, they could offer something Adrian couldn't. Resources without his name attached. Money. Influence. Access to information networks that operated outside official channels. If it was a trap, she'd be walking into Adrian's hands. She thought about the knife in her pocket, about the maps and documents hidden in her room, about the fact that she'd been in Ashford for 5 days and Adrian's men hadn't found her yet, which meant either they were incompetent or they were being very, very careful. The smart move was to ignore the letter, stay invisible, keep moving. But Evelyn was tired of running and tired of being smart in ways that only benefited other people. She folded the paper and tucked it away. Tomorrow evening, the Copper Anchor, 8 o'clock. She'd go, but she'd go prepared. The next day passed slowly. Evelyn spent the morning at the docks, watching ships load and unload, listening to sailors argue about weather patterns and cargo rates. She was building a mental map of the port's operations, identifying which vessels belonged to military contractors, which to private merchants, which to interests that preferred to avoid official documentation. Around noon, she delivered her letter to General Aldrin via a courier service that asked no questions as long as the coin was good. Then she returned to her room and prepared for the evening. She laid out her options. The gray dress she'd been wearing, plain and forgettable. A slightly better dress she'd bought yesterday, dark blue with modest trim. And the knife, cleaned and sharpened. She chose the blue dress. It said competent professional, without saying desperate runaway. She pinned her hair up carefully, checking her reflection in the small cracked mirror above the washstand. The woman looking back at her was thinner than Lady Voss had been, harder around the eyes. Good. Lady Voss had been soft, naive. This woman wasn't. At 7:30, Evelyn left the tavern and made her way through the evening crowds toward the Copper Anchor. The tavern was nicer than the one she'd been staying in, timber-framed, 3 stories, with actual glass in the windows. The kind of place where merchants did business over wine instead of ale. She paused across the street, watching the entrance. Men in good coats came and went. A few women, dressed well enough to be merchants' wives or independent traders. No obvious soldiers, no one watching the door too carefully. Evelyn crossed the street and went inside. The Copper Anchor's main room was warm and crowded, smelling of roasted meat and tobacco. She scanned the space quickly, cataloging exits, faces, potential threats. A staircase led to the upper floors. A hallway in the back probably connected to the kitchens. "Help you, miss." The barkeep was older, balding, with the professional neutrality of someone who'd seen everything. "I'm looking for Mr. Varon." The barkeep nodded toward the stairs. "Private room. 2nd floor, 3rd door on the left. He's expecting you." Evelyn climbed the stairs slowly, her hand near the pocket where the knife rested. The 2nd floor hallway was quieter, lined with doors. She found the 3rd on the left and knocked once. "Come in." The voice was male, calm, educated. Evelyn opened the door. The room was small but well appointed. A table, 4 chairs, a window overlooking the street. The man sitting at the table was perhaps 50, gray-haired, dressed in dark formal wear that suggested wealth without advertising it. His eyes were sharp, assessing her the same way she was assessing him. "Miss Hart." He stood, gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." Evelyn closed the door behind her but didn't move toward the chair. "You're Mr. Varon." "I am. And you're cautious." "Good. That's a useful quality in this line of work." "What line of work?" Varon smiled slightly. "The line where information is more valuable than gold, where knowing what's coming is worth more than knowing what's happened. The line where a woman with your particular skills could make herself very wealthy and very independent." "You don't know what my skills are, don't I?" Varon pulled a folder from the satchel beside his chair and set it on the table. "Lady Thorne was quite thorough in her recommendation. She described you as a strategic analyst of exceptional ability, someone who spent years crafting military and political strategies for, shall we say, an ungrateful employer." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Lady Thorne talks too much. Lady Thorne talks exactly as much as she intends to, and she believes you're wasted in hiding, as do I." Varon opened the folder. Inside were papers, letters, reports, documents Evelyn recognized. Her work, copies of strategies she'd written, somehow traced back to her despite Adrian's name on them. "How did you get those?" Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "I have sources. The same sources that tell me Duke Voss is currently scrambling to hold together a northern strategy that's collapsing faster than he can respond. The same sources that tell me his recent military recommendations have been uncharacteristically clumsy. Almost as if the mind behind them is no longer available." Evelyn said nothing. Varon leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You built him, didn't you? The great Duke Voss. You were the engine, and he was just the pretty facade people saw. That's a dangerous accusation to make. It's not an accusation, it's an observation. And it's not dangerous if it's true, and you're willing to profit from that truth." Varon tapped the folder. "My consortium represents interests in 7 countries. We deal in trade, intelligence, political leverage. We don't care about titles or reputations. We care about results. And you, Miss Hart, produce results. What exactly are you offering? You, employment. Anonymous, well-compensated, entirely independent of your former situation. You provide analysis and strategy for our operations. We provide you with resources, protection, and a very comfortable living. You work under whatever name you choose. You answer to me and the consortium, not to anyone who might want you silenced or institutionalized." Evelyn's pulse quickened, but she kept her face neutral. "And if I refuse, then you walk out that door and we never speak again. I'm not in the business of forcing cooperation. Desperation makes people sloppy. I prefer willing partners." "Partners, that's an interesting word." "It's an accurate word. You need what we can provide: safety, income, purpose. We need what you can provide: insight that keeps us ahead of political and military shifts that affect our interests. That's a partnership." Evelyn moved to the window, looking down at the street below. A carriage passed, lanterns swaying, ordinary people going about ordinary lives. She used to have an ordinary life, or something that looked like one anyway. "I have one condition," she said without turning around. "Name it." "Everything I do for you stays anonymous, completely. If my name, any version of it, gets connected to your operations, our arrangement ends immediately." "Agreed. Anonymity protects us both. And I want veto power. If you ask me to work on something that conflicts with my ethics, I can refuse without penalty." Varon was quiet for a moment. Then, "Define ethics." "I don't help start wars. I don't facilitate invasions. I don't provide strategies designed to maximize civilian casualties." Evelyn turned to face him. "I'm good at what I do because I think several moves ahead. That means I see consequences. And I won't be responsible for consequences I can't live with. Even if those consequences might hurt Duke Voss. Especially if they're designed to hurt anyone. I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in survival and self-determination. If those align with your interests, we can work together. If not, then like you said, I walk out that door." Varon studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Acceptable. Though I should warn you, Duke Voss is already hurting himself quite effectively. He doesn't need our help. What do you mean? The Rendall Pass situation. You're aware of it? Evelyn's stomach tightened. I'm aware. Voss is planning to send 3 battalions to reinforce the garrison. Heavy armor, artillery support. A show of force designed to intimidate the Highland tribes into submission. Varen pulled another paper from the folder. It's exactly the wrong move. The tribes aren't intimidated by force. They're unified by it. This deployment will trigger the conflict he's trying to prevent. When? The orders go out in 4 days. 4 days. Evelyn had sent her letter to General Aldrin this morning. If Aldrin read it, if he took it seriously, maybe he could intervene. Maybe. But maybe wasn't good enough. I need to see those deployment orders, Evelyn said. Varen raised an eyebrow. Why? Because if what you're saying is accurate, Voss is about to get hundreds of people killed, soldiers who follow orders, tribal families who defend their land. And when it goes wrong, and it will go wrong, the backlash will destabilize the entire northern region, which will hurt your consortium's interests as much as anyone's. So you want to stop it? I want to mitigate it. There's a difference. I can't stop Voss from being an idiot, but I might be able to limit the damage. Varen considered this. Then he pushed the folder across the table. Everything we have on the deployment is in there. If you can use it to prevent a bloodbath, that serves our interests. Consider it your first assignment. Evelyn picked up the folder and flipped through the contents. Deployment schedules, supply routes, communication protocols. Everything she'd need to understand Adrian's plan. Everything she'd need to dismantle it. I'll need secure access to northern communication lines, she said, and I'll need it fast. We have contacts in the telegraph offices. What do you need sent, and where? Evelyn pulled out a blank sheet from the folder and began writing. Her hand moved quickly, translating complex strategy into clear, actionable intelligence. She wrote 3 messages, one to General Aldrin, reinforcing her earlier letter with specific tactical concerns, one to a garrison commander she knew to be competent and independent-minded, and one to a tribal mediator she'd worked with years ago, back when Adrian still let her handle diplomatic communications. Each message was carefully worded, anonymous, untraceable, but carrying enough detail to be credible. She handed the pages to Varen. These go out tonight, separately. Different telegraph offices if possible. Varen glanced at the messages, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. Consider it done. Anything else? I need to know if Duke Voss has trackers looking for me in Ashford. Names, descriptions, methods. I'll have that information by tomorrow morning, and I need a backup exit strategy. If this situation escalates and I need to disappear again, I can't afford to improvise. We maintain safe houses in 6 port cities. I'll get you the locations and access codes. Evelyn set the folder down and met Varen's eyes directly. This partnership, it's contingent on you being honest with me. If I find out you're using me the way Voss did, if I discover you've been feeding me selective information or manipulating my analysis, I walk. And I take everything I know about your operations with me. Varen's smile was cold, but genuine. Fair enough. And if you betray the consortium's interests, if you sell our information to competitors or authorities, you'll find that we're significantly less forgiving than Duke Voss. Understood. Then we have an agreement. Varen stood and extended his hand. Evelyn hesitated. This was it. The moment she stopped being Adrian's stolen asset and became something else entirely, something independent, something dangerous. She shook his hand. His grip was firm, businesslike. Welcome to the consortium, Miss Hart. I think you're going to find this arrangement much more satisfying than your previous one. We'll see, Evelyn said. She left the copper anchor 20 minutes later with a signed contract hidden in her jacket, a purse containing more money than she'd seen in years, and a small, encrypted codebook that would let her communicate with Varen's network. She also left with the weight of 300 soldiers' lives pressing against her conscience. If her messages didn't reach the right people in time, if Adrian's deployment went forward as planned, those soldiers would march into a trap, and she'd be the only person who'd seen it coming and failed to stop it. Evelyn walked quickly through the darkening streets, her mind already running through contingencies. If the messages worked, if Aldrin listened, if the tribal mediator remembered her and trusted the warning, too many ifs. She needed a backup plan, something that would force Adrian to reconsider the deployment even if her anonymous intelligence was ignored. The answer came to her as she turned onto a narrow side street. It was risky, possibly insane, but it was the one move Adrian would never expect. She needed to go public. Not about Adrian's theft of her work. That would be satisfying, but ultimately just gossip. She needed to go public about the Rendall Pass deployment. Make it impossible for Adrian to proceed without facing questions, scrutiny, oversight. But how? Evelyn stopped walking. Ahead of her, light spilled from a print shop window. She could see the silhouettes of workers inside, setting type, running presses. The evening edition wouldn't go out until tomorrow morning, unless someone paid for an urgent special printing. Evelyn changed direction and headed for the print shop. The owner was a tired-looking man in ink-stained clothes. He looked up when she entered, clearly hoping to close soon. "We're done for the day, miss. Come back tomorrow." "I need something printed tonight. A public notice. 1 page, 500 copies." "Tonight? Do you know how much that costs?" Evelyn pulled out half the money Varen had given her and set it on the counter. The owner's eyes widened. "What's the notice say?" "Open letter to the War Council regarding the proposed Rendall Pass deployment. Concerns about strategic oversight and potential humanitarian consequences. Signed by a concerned military analyst." The owner picked up the money, counted it slowly. "Military matters. That could be sensitive. It's also legal. I'm not revealing classified information. I'm raising questions that should be asked publicly." "And you want this distributed tomorrow?" "I want it on every corner in the government district by dawn. I want copies delivered to the council offices, the major newspapers, the officers' clubs. I want it impossible to ignore." The owner looked at the money again, then at Evelyn. "This is going to cause trouble, isn't it?" "For the right people, yes," he sighed. "Give me the text. I'll have it ready by midnight." Evelyn spent the next 2 hours writing and revising the letter. She made it factual, clinical, stripped of emotion. She laid out the strategic flaws in the Rendall deployment, the vulnerable supply lines, the predictable routes, the failure to account for Highland coalition movements. She cited historical precedents. She raised questions about oversight and accountability. She didn't mention Adrian by name. She didn't have to. Everyone would know whose strategy she was dissecting. She signed it E. Hart, independent strategic analyst. At midnight, she approved the proof. The owner ran the presses while she waited, the machines clattering in the darkness like mechanical thunder. By 2 in the morning, 500 copies of her letter sat stacked in crates, ready for distribution. Evelyn paid the delivery boys extra to make sure the letters reached their destinations before dawn. Then she returned to her room, exhausted and wired with adrenaline. She'd done it. She'd gone from invisible to impossible to ignore in less than 12 hours. Adrian would know. He'd see the letter, recognize the analysis, realize that she wasn't just hiding, she was fighting back. And he'd come for her. Evelyn lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the port city settling into night. She thought about the soldiers who might live because of her warning, about Adrian waking up to find his strategy publicly questioned, about Varen and the consortium and the dangerous game she'd just agreed to play. She thought about power, how it worked, how it moved, how it could be taken from people who never realized they'd been holding someone else's weapon. And she thought about what came next. Because Adrian wouldn't accept this. He couldn't. His entire identity was built on the illusion that he was the brilliant strategist, the great mind, the irreplaceable Duke. Evelyn had just challenged that illusion publicly. He'd have to respond. And when he did, he'd come with everything he had. Evelyn closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe slowly, steadily. Let him come. She'd spent 5 years making him invincible. She knew exactly how to unmake him. The letter hit the War Council chambers like a grenade at dawn. Evelyn heard about it third hand, sitting in a dockside cafe 2 blocks from her room, nursing tea that had gone cold an hour ago. The woman at the next table was reading the morning paper aloud to her companion, and Evelyn caught fragments between the clatter of dishes and street noise. Unprecedented breach of protocol. Questions the Duke's strategic assessment. Calling for immediate review. Evelyn kept her eyes on her own paper, but her hands had gone still. The print shop owner had delivered. Every word she'd written was now circulating through the capital's power centers like poison in a bloodstream. She'd expected fury. She'd expected Adrian to double down, to dismiss the letter as the work of a rival or a malcontent. What she hadn't expected was the silence that followed. No official response, no dismissal, just silence. That was worse. Evelyn left coins on the table and walked back to her room, her mind cataloging possibilities. Adrian wasn't stupid, reckless sometimes, arrogant often, but not stupid. He'd recognize the analysis. He'd know it came from someone who understood his methods intimately, and he'd be calculating right now, trying to determine whether to respond publicly or handle this quietly. She was betting on quietly, which meant she needed to leave Ashford, soon. She was halfway up the stairs to her room when she heard voices. Male. Unfamiliar. Coming from the second-floor landing. Evelyn stopped, pressing herself against the wall. Through the narrow gap in the stairwell, she could see two men standing outside her door. Both wore dark coats, well-tailored but unremarkable. The taller one was trying the door handle. The shorter one kept glancing down the hallway, watching. Not tavern staff, not local authorities, Adrian's men. Evelyn's pulse kicked hard, but her thoughts stayed cold. She'd prepared for this. The room contained nothing that identified her as Lady Voss. She'd been careful. Her documents were in the satchel she carried everywhere. The money from Varen was distributed between her jacket and her boots. The knife was in her pocket. But if they were here, they'd found her somehow. Which meant staying in Ashford was no longer an option. The taller man gave up on the lock and stepped back. Check the tavern keeper. Find out when she's expected back. And if she runs? She won't get far. Voss wants her brought in alive, preferably quiet. Preferably. That word carried weight. It meant alive was negotiable. Evelyn backed down the stairs slowly, keeping her weight on the outer edges to avoid creaks. She reached the ground floor and slipped out through the kitchen entrance, nodding to a cook who barely glanced up from his work. The street was bright with morning sun, crowded with merchants and dock workers. Evelyn pulled her shawl up over her hair and moved quickly. Not running. Running drew attention, but walking with purpose. She needed to reach Varen. Now. The problem was, she didn't know where Varen was. Their meeting had been at the Copper Anchor, but he'd made it clear that wasn't his base of operations. He'd given her the code book, told her she could send messages through the telegraph office using specific codes, but that took time. Time she didn't have. Think. Varen had said the consortium had safe houses. 6 port cities. But he hadn't given her the Ashford location yet. That was supposed to come this morning. Evelyn turned down a narrow alley between 2 warehouses, buying herself a moment to think. If Adrian's men were at her room, they'd spread out soon, checking the docks, the coaching stations, anywhere she might run. She couldn't go back for her things. Couldn't risk the telegraph office if they were watching it. She needed a bolt hole. Fast. Lady Thorne. The thought came sharp and clear. Thorne had resources, connections. She'd sent the courier to Evelyn before. Maybe she had someone here in Ashford. But contacting Thorne meant risk. If Adrian was watching Thorne's communications, Evelyn's thoughts fractured as footsteps echoed at the alley entrance behind her. She turned. The shorter man from her hallway was silhouetted against the bright street, blocking her exit. Miss Hart. His voice was polite, almost friendly. Duke Voss would like a word with you. If you'd come with me, please. Evelyn's hand found the knife in her pocket. I'm not interested in conversation. I'm afraid it's not a request. The man stepped forward and Evelyn saw the shape of a pistol beneath his coat. Please don't make this difficult. The Duke just wants to talk. The Duke wants me declared insane and locked away. I'm familiar with his conversation style. The man's expression didn't change. My orders are to bring you in. How that happens is up to you. Evelyn gauged the distance between them. Maybe 10 feet. The alley continued behind her, twisting between buildings toward the waterfront. If she ran, he'd shoot. If she fought, he'd overpower her. He had 60 pounds and 6 inches on her. If she talked, she might buy time. What's he paying you? She asked. That threw him. Excuse me? Boss? What's he paying you to chase down his wife? Because I can promise you, whatever he's offering, it's not worth what happens when this falls apart. This isn't about money. Everything's about money, or power, or reputation. Which one is yours? The man's jaw tightened. The Duke is an important man. He has influence. Working for him has advantages. Had, Evelyn corrected. Past tense. The letter that went out this morning, that's just the beginning. Voss is losing his grip, and everyone's starting to notice. The question is whether you want to be standing next to him when he falls. You're bluffing. Am I? Check the deployment orders for Rendall Pass. See if they're still moving forward. I'll wait. The man hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Evelyn threw the knife. She wasn't aiming to kill. She wasn't even sure she could. Not at this distance, not with her limited practice. But the blade caught him in the shoulder, just enough to shock, to hurt. He stumbled back with a shout, and Evelyn ran. The alley twisted left, then right. She could hear him behind her, cursing, crashing into refuse barrels. But he was injured, slower. She burst out onto a side street that ran parallel to the docks, nearly colliding with a woman carrying laundry. Sorry, excuse me. She kept running. The waterfront opened ahead, a chaos of ships and cargo and shouting voices. Evelyn plunged into the crowd, using bodies as cover. She needed to disappear, to find somewhere Adrian's men wouldn't think to look. A ship's horn blasted nearby. Evelyn glanced toward the sound and saw a merchant vessel preparing to cast off, stevedores hauling the gangplank. On impulse, she ran toward it. Wait, please wait. A sailor looked down from the deck. We're departing, miss. No passengers. I need passage. Any port south. I can pay. She pulled coins from her pocket, holding them up. Please. The sailor glanced at the coins, then back at her face. Whatever he saw there, desperation, determination, fear, made him nod. Get aboard, quick. Evelyn scrambled up the gangplank just as it lifted. The ship lurched as lines were cast off, and she grabbed the railing to steady herself. Behind her, on the dock, she caught a glimpse of the man from the alley, clutching his shoulder, scanning the crowd. Their eyes met for a moment. Then the ship swung away from the dock, and the distance between them widened. Evelyn turned away and let herself breathe. The ship was called the Mariner's Grace, and it smelled like salt and tar and fish oil. The sailor who'd led her aboard led her to a cramped space below deck that might generously be called a cabin. It had a hammock, a single lantern, and barely enough room to stand. Best I can offer, he said. We're full cargo this run. You'll have to share meals with the crew. It's perfect. Thank you. Where are you running from? Evelyn met his eyes. Does it matter? He shrugged. Not to me, but Captain will want to know you're not bringing trouble aboard. The only trouble I'm bringing is the kind that stays behind on the dock. Fair enough. He paused at the door. We dock in Harwich in 3 days. From there, you're on your own. Understood. When he left, Evelyn collapsed onto the hammock and closed her eyes. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up. She'd thrown a knife at a man. Actually thrown it. And then she'd run and climbed aboard a ship, and now she was sailing away from Ashford with nothing but the clothes on her back and the papers in her satchel. She thought about the room she'd abandoned, the maps, the extra clothes, the notes she'd been compiling. Gone, all of it. But she was alive. And free. And that had to be enough. 3 days to Harwich. 3 days to figure out what came next. Evelyn pulled out the codebook Varen had given her and began composing a message in her head. She'd need to contact him from Harwich, explain what happened, get new arrangements. The consortium wouldn't be happy about her sudden departure. It looked unstable, unreliable, but they'd understand necessity when she explained it. And if they didn't, well, she'd survived without them before. The ship rocked gently as it caught the outgoing tide. Evelyn let the motion lull her, let exhaustion pull her toward something like sleep. She woke hours later to shouting above deck. Evelyn sat up sharply, disoriented. The cabin was dark. The lantern had burned out. She could hear feet pounding on the deck, voices calling orders. Something was wrong. She climbed out of the hammock and made her way to the ladder that led topside. Daylight burned her eyes as she emerged. The crew was rushing around, securing lines, adjusting sails. The captain stood near the wheel, a weathered man with gray hair and sharp eyes. "What's happening?" Evelyn called. "Patrol ship," one of the sailors said without stopping. "Navy cutter. They're signaling us to heave to." Evelyn's blood went cold. Why would the Navy stop a merchant vessel? Could be routine inspection. Could be they're looking for smugglers. Could be... The sailor glanced at her. Could be they're looking for someone. No, Adrian couldn't have moved that fast. It had been less than 12 hours since she'd left Ashford. There was no way he could have gotten naval authorization, coordinated with a patrol ship, positioned it to intercept this specific vessel. Except he could. Because Adrian was on the War Council, because he had connections in the Admiralty, because when a duke made urgent requests framed as security matters, people listened. Evelyn watched the cutter approach, its clean lines cutting through the water like a blade. It was flying official colors. 36 crew, maybe more. Armed. "If they board us," the captain said quietly, appearing beside her, "and they're looking for someone, are they going to find her on my ship?" Evelyn wanted to lie. Wanted to say no, this was coincidence, routine, but the captain's eyes were too knowing. "Probably," she said. He nodded slowly. "What'd you do?" "I left my husband." "That's not usually a naval matter." "It is when your husband is Duke Adrian Voss and he wants you back badly enough to call in favors." The captain's expression shifted. Surprise, then calculation, then something that might have been respect. "Well, that's a problem. I'm sorry. I didn't know he'd—" "Save it." The captain turned to his first mate. "How long until they're alongside?" 10 minutes, maybe less. "Can we outrun them?" "Not in this wind. They've got speed on us." The captain rubbed his jaw, thinking. Then he looked at Evelyn. "You got any diplomatic immunity? Royal pardons? Anything that makes you untouchable?" "No." "How about money, real money, the kind that buys creative solutions?" Evelyn thought of the purse from Varen, still tucked in her jacket. "Some. Not enough to bribe a naval crew." "Don't need to bribe the crew. Just need to convince them they boarded the wrong ship." The captain raised his voice. "Davy, get Miss Hart below and find her something to wear that doesn't say runaway Duchess. Something that says cargo worker or cook's assistant. Move." The young sailor from earlier grabbed Evelyn's arm and pulled her toward the ladder. "Come on, fast." Below deck, Davy rummaged through a chest and pulled out rough canvas trousers, a stained shirt, a kerchief. "Put these on. Tie your hair back, rub some of this on your face." He handed her a tin of something that smelled like grease and charcoal. "What is this?" "Engine oil mixed with soot. Makes you look like you've been working the boilers. Navy won't look twice at crew." Evelyn changed quickly, her fingers clumsy with urgency. The clothes were too big, smelled like sweat and smoke, but they transformed her completely. She tied the kerchief over her hair, rubbed the oil-soot mixture on her face and hands until she looked grimy and exhausted. "Good enough," Davy said. "When they board, you're Ellie. You've been with us 6 months. You work the galley and help with cargo. Don't volunteer information. Don't make eye contact. And for the love of—" He stopped himself. "Just keep quiet." Above, the ship lurched as the cutter drew alongside. Evelyn heard the thump of grappling hooks, the creak of ropes, boots on the deck. "Stay here," Davy whispered. "If they search below, you're checking inventory in the cargo hold." He disappeared up the ladder. Evelyn pressed herself into the shadows, listening. "Routine inspection, Captain. We're looking for a fugitive." That was a new voice. Naval officer, clipped and formal. "Fugitive?" The captain's voice carried well. "What kind?" "Woman, late 20s, dark hair, traveling alone. She may be using the name Hart or Hartwell. We have orders to detain her for questioning. Haven't seen anyone matching that description. My crew's been with me for months. No passengers this run. Nevertheless, we'll need to search the vessel. Orders from the Admiralty." "The Admiralty's taking an interest in merchant shipping now?" "When the request comes from Duke Voss himself, yes. The woman is his wife. She's left without permission, and there are concerns about her stability." Evelyn's nails dug into her palms. Adrian had gone straight to the top, made it official, made her the problem, the unstable wife, the woman who needed to be found and returned for her own good. "Well, you're welcome to search," the captain said, "but you won't find any duchesses hiding in my cargo hold." Footsteps on the ladder. Evelyn moved quickly, slipping through the narrow passage that led to the cargo area. Crates and barrels were stacked floor to ceiling, secured with rope and canvas. She wedged herself between 2 stacks, making herself as small as possible. The search took 20 minutes. She heard boots on the deck, voices calling to each other, the scrape of barrels being moved. Someone passed within 3 feet of her hiding spot, lantern swinging. She held her breath until the light moved on. Finally, the sounds retreated, boots on the ladder going up, muffled conversation above. "Told you, no one here. Verify the crew roster. All accounted for. More waiting. Evelyn's legs cramped from the awkward position. Her heart hammered so loud she was certain someone would hear it. Then the grappling hooks released. The ship separated. The naval cutter's wake rocked the Mariner's Grace gently as it pulled away. Davy appeared in the cargo hold entrance. They're gone. You can come out. Evelyn unfolded herself from the hiding spot, every muscle protesting. Her hands were shaking again. Thank you. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank the captain. He's the one who convinced them you were crew. Davy hesitated. Is it true? You're really Duke Voss's wife? Was. I was his wife. I'm not anything to him anymore. He seems to disagree. He's wrong about a lot of things. The captain was waiting when she climbed back on deck. The rest of the crew had returned to their stations, but she could feel their eyes on her, calculating, wondering. That, the captain said quietly, was expensive. You understand that, right? Naval searches delay schedules. Delayed schedules cost money, and if word gets out that I harbored a fugitive Duchess, I'll pay you. Evelyn pulled out the purse, counted out coins. Everything she had left from Varen. It's not enough to cover your losses, I know, but it's what I have. The captain took the coins, weighed them in his hand, then he handed half back. Keep some. You'll need it when we dock. He studied her face. You really left him, didn't you? Walked away from a duchy. I left a prison that looked like a palace. And now he's hunting you with naval ships. The captain shook his head. You must have really scared him. I took something he needs, something he can't function without. What, his dignity? His competence? Turns out he doesn't have any without me. The captain laughed, a short, sharp bark. Well, that explains the Navy. Can't have people finding out the great Duke Voss is just a pretty uniform stuffed with someone else's brains. Exactly. You're in deeper trouble than I thought, Miss... What should I call you? Evelyn. Just Evelyn. Right. Well, Evelyn, here's the situation. We dock in Harwick in 3 days, but if Voss has the Navy stopping ships, he'll have people watching the ports. Every port. You step off this vessel looking like yourself, you'll be arrested within the hour. I know. So what's your plan? Evelyn looked at the horizon, at the endless water stretching in every direction. I'm working on it. Work faster. Because we hit Harwick at dawn in 3 days, and I'm not risking my ship to smuggle you past port authorities. That night, Evelyn lay in the hammock and forced herself to think past the panic. Adrian had escalated, gone public with the hunt, framed her as unstable, mobilized official resources. That meant he was desperate, losing control of the situation, of his reputation. The letter about Rendell Pass had hurt him worse than she'd realized. Good. Let him hurt. But desperation made people dangerous. Adrian would keep pushing, keep using every resource he had. And he had a lot of resources. She needed more than running. She needed leverage that would make him stop. The portfolio, the proof of her authorship. That was leverage, but only if she could deploy it in a way that mattered. Publishing it would destroy Adrian's reputation, but it would also expose her completely. She'd become a public scandal, examined and judged and probably dismissed as a bitter wife trying to tear down her husband. She needed something else, something that proved her value beyond just being the woman behind the Duke. Something that demonstrated her capability independent of Adrian's name. The consortium. Varen's operation. If she could deliver results for them, actionable intelligence, successful strategies, profitable outcomes, she could build her own reputation. Anonymously at first, then eventually under her own name once Adrian's influence waned. But that took time. And right now, time was the one thing she didn't have. Evelyn closed her eyes and let her mind drift through possibilities, scenarios, outcomes. She'd spent 5 years thinking several moves ahead for Adrian. Now she needed to do it for herself. By morning, she had the beginning of a plan. When the ship docked in Harwick 3 days later, Evelyn wasn't on it. At least, no one by that name disembarked. Instead, a crew member named Ellie left with the night shift change, dressed in worker's canvas, face still smudged with soot. She slipped through the docks in the pre-dawn darkness, just another laborer heading home after a long voyage. Evelyn made her way through the city's working district, keeping to crowds, avoiding main streets. Harwick was bigger than Ashford, more industrial. Factories lined the river, belching smoke into the gray sky. The air tasted like coal and metal. She found a telegraph office in a commercial district, paid extra for encryption and priority delivery. The message went to one of Varen's coded addresses. Ashford compromised. Naval intercept attempted. Require immediate relocation assistance and secure communication channel. EH. The response came within 2 hours. Safe house, 47 Millwright Lane, 3rd floor, blue door, key under mat. Contact will arrive tonight. Sit tight. V. Evelyn memorized the address and burned the telegram. The safe house was in a neighborhood that straddled the line between respectable and rough. The building was narrow, wedged between a tailor's shop and a boarding house. Evelyn found the blue door on the 3rd floor, retrieved the key, and let herself in. Inside was sparse but functional. A bed, a table, a stove, a window that overlooked the street. She locked the door behind her and finally allowed herself to collapse. She'd been running for 8 days. 8 days since she'd crawled through that drainage culvert. 8 days since she'd been Lady Voss. 8 days since she'd had a real plan beyond survive. Evelyn pulled out her satchel and spread its contents on the table. The portfolio, still intact, still damning, her journals, the codebook from Varen, and a new map of the Northern Territories she'd bought from a street vendor in Harwick, already marked with notes about troop movements and supply routes. She was starting to build something here. Not a life, not yet, but the framework of one. A structure where her intelligence had value, where her work belonged to her, where she wasn't invisible. The contact arrived after dark. Evelyn heard the knock, 3 short, 1 long, and opened the door to find a woman about her age, blonde hair pulled back, dressed like a merchant secretary. "Miss Hart?" "Yes." "I'm Claire, Varen sent me. May I come in?" Evelyn stepped aside. Claire entered, glanced around the room, nodded approvingly. "Good. You followed protocol. No one saw you arrive?" "Not that I noticed. Adrian Voss has people watching the major coaching stations and harbors, but they're spread thin. We should be safe here for now." Claire set a package on the table. New identity papers, money, and a message from Varen. Evelyn opened the package. Inside were documents identifying her as Eleanor Harris, clerk for a shipping concern. The photograph, when had they gotten a photograph, showed her face, but harder somehow. Older. The woman in the picture looked like someone who'd been working, not hiding. "How did you—" "We have resources. Use the name, memorize the background details in that folder. If anyone asks, you've been working for Sea Strand Shipping for 2 years. Your references will check out." "And the message from Varen?" Claire's expression shifted, became more serious. "Duke Voss submitted a formal petition to the Crown yesterday. He's requesting a warrant for your arrest on grounds of theft of state secrets and endangerment of military operations." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "He's claiming I stole classified information? He's claiming you took documents relating to military strategy and intelligence operations. Documents that, if released to enemy agents, could compromise national security. He's painting you as a traitor, Miss Hart, not just an errant wife." "That's insane. Those documents are mine. I wrote them." "Can you prove that?" "Yes. The portfolio contains papers in your handwriting that could just as easily be copied from originals he authored. In a court, without witnesses who saw you creating those strategies, without official records attributing them to you, it's your word against a duke's." Claire leaned forward. "He's not just trying to bring you back anymore. He's trying to bury you." Evelyn sat down slowly. Adrian had escalated again. Of course he had. The letter about Rendell Pass had forced him to defend his competence publicly. And the only way to do that without admitting his fraud was to discredit her completely. Make her the villain, the thief, the traitor. "Has the Crown issued the warrant?" "Not yet. There are questions. Some council members are pushing for an investigation before signing off on anything. But Voss has support, enough to make this dangerous." "How long do I have?" "Days. Maybe a week. After that, you'll be wanted across the realm. Every port, every border crossing. There won't be anywhere to run." Evelyn stared at the papers on the table. Her portfolio, her proof. Suddenly, it wasn't enough. It had never been enough. Because Adrian wasn't fighting her with truth. He was fighting her with power. And power didn't care about truth. "Varen wants to know what you need," Claire said quietly. "I need Adrian to stop." "That's not specific enough." I need him too compromised to pursue me, too busy defending himself to attack me. I need his attention completely focused somewhere else. How? Evelyn looked up. The Rendall Pass deployment. Did it go forward? It was delayed. Some questions were raised after your letter, but Voss is pushing to resume the operation within the week. Then I need to make sure it fails. Publicly. Catastrophically. In a way that makes it impossible to ignore who was responsible. Claire's eyes widened slightly. You want to sabotage a military operation. I want to prevent a massacre and expose Adrian's incompetence at the same time. That's not sabotage. That's whistleblowing. The Crown won't see it that way. The Crown doesn't need to know it's me. They just need to see Adrian fail on his own terms, with his own strategy. And when it falls apart, when soldiers die because he didn't listen to people who actually understood the situation, they'll have to question his judgment. That's extremely dangerous. More dangerous than being labeled a traitor and hunted by every authority in the realm. Claire didn't answer. After a moment, she said, "What do you need from us?" Evelyn pulled out the map and began marking positions. I need access to northern communication lines. I need someone who can get messages to the tribal coalition, someone they'll trust. And I need a guarantee that when this goes sideways for Adrian, the consortium won't abandon me. I can't promise that last part. Then go back to Varen and tell him this. I can give him intelligence on northern trade routes that will be worth 10 times what he's paying me, but only if I'm alive and free to deliver it. And the only way I stay alive is if Adrian Voss is too destroyed to come after me. Claire stood slowly. I'll relay that message. But Miss Hart, Evelyn, you're talking about bringing down a duke. That's not just dangerous, it's nearly impossible. Nearly, Evelyn said. Not quite. After Claire left, Evelyn worked through the night. She wrote messages to tribal leaders, explaining the deployment in detail, offering warnings and strategic advice for defense. She drafted intelligence reports for sympathetic council members, laying out exactly why the Rendall Pass operation would fail. She composed anonymous letters to journalists, hinting at questions they should ask about the Duke's recent decisions. And she wrote one final letter, this one to Adrian himself. You wanted me gone. You tried to have me erased, declared insane, locked away where I couldn't embarrass you. And when I left instead, you decided to destroy me publicly. You're calling me a traitor, a thief. You're using the Crown's authority to hunt me like a criminal. Here's what you don't understand. I don't want revenge. I want you to stop. But if you keep pushing, if you force this to escalate, I will release everything, every strategy you stole, every lie you told, every medal you earned with my words. And then I'll make sure Rendall Pass burns. Not the soldiers, never the soldiers. But your reputation, your career, your precious illusion that you're anything more than a thief in a duke's uniform. Stop hunting me. Withdraw the warrant. Accept that I'm gone and move forward with whatever's left of your competence. Or watch everything you've built collapse because you couldn't let go of the weapon you never deserved to hold. She sealed it and addressed it to the Voss estate. She'd send it through Varen's network, untraceable, uninterceptable. One final warning, and then the gloves came off. Evelyn was folding the letter when she heard footsteps in the hall outside. Heavy, multiple sets, boots on wood. She froze. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Then a voice. Familiar, cold, efficient. Eleanor Harris, open the door. We have a warrant for your arrest. Her blood turned to ice. They'd found her. Already. Within hours of her arrival. Which meant either Claire had betrayed her, or the safe house had been compromised, or Adrian's network was better than anyone had realized. Evelyn looked at the window. 3rd floor. No fire escape, no easy way down. The door shuddered as something heavy hit it. They were breaking in. She grabbed her satchel, stuffed the portfolio and the letter inside. The window opened with a shriek of old wood. Cold air rushed in. Outside, the alley was dark and narrow. Too far to jump safely. But across the gap, maybe 6 feet away, was the roof of the neighboring building. Lower. Maybe 10 feet down. The door splintered. Evelyn climbed onto the windowsill, balanced for one heartbeat, and jumped. She hit the roof hard, shoulder first, and the impact knocked the air from her lungs. Pain exploded through her arm, but she rolled with the momentum, scrabbling for purchase on the slick shingles. Behind her, voices shouted from the window she'd just leaped through. She jumped! Get around to the... Evelyn didn't wait to hear the rest. She pushed herself up, ignoring the screaming protest from her shoulder, and ran across the rooftop. The building was old, irregular, with jutting chimneys and uneven levels. She used them all, climbing higher when she could, dropping lower when necessary, putting distance between herself and the voices. At the far edge, another gap. This one wider, maybe 8 feet to the next building. She didn't think, didn't calculate, just ran and jumped. This time she caught the edge with her hands, dangled for a sickening moment, then hauled herself up with strength she didn't know she had. Her shoulder felt like it was tearing apart, but she kept moving, kept running, because stopping meant getting caught, and getting caught meant everything was over. 3 rooftops later, she found a fire escape. Rusty, questionable, but functional. She climbed down into an alley that smelled like rotting vegetables and backed up drains. Her legs nearly gave out when she hit the ground, but she forced herself forward, stumbling deeper into the maze of back streets that connected Harwick's industrial district. She had to get out of the city. Now. Tonight. Adrian's people knew about the safe house, which meant they knew about Eleanor Harris, which meant her new identity was compromised before she'd even used it. How? How had they found her so fast? Evelyn pressed herself into a shadowed doorway, breathing hard, trying to think through the panic. Claire had known the address. Varen had known. And anyone monitoring telegraph lines could have intercepted her message, decoded it, traced it. Or Claire had been turned, paid off, threatened. It didn't matter which. The consortium's network was compromised, or it had never been secure to begin with. She was alone again. Evelyn checked her satchel. The portfolio was intact, no, just luck. The letter to Adrian was creased but readable, and tucked in the bottom, almost forgotten, was the codebook. She pulled it out, studying the cipher key in the dim light filtering from a street lamp. If the telegraph lines were monitored, she couldn't use those, but there were other ways to communicate. Slower, riskier, but possible. She needed to reach someone Adrian couldn't touch, someone with enough authority to make him hesitate. General Aldrin, the commander she'd sent intelligence to about Rendall Pass. If he'd received her warnings, if he'd taken them seriously, he might be the only person in a position to actually stop the deployment. But how to reach him? She couldn't walk into a military garrison asking for an audience with the general, and sending another letter risked interception, unless she didn't send it through official channels. Evelyn remembered something from her years managing Adrian's correspondence. Aldrin had a brother, a civilian, a merchant who ran shipping concerns along the northern coast. She'd seen letters exchanged between them, personal correspondence that bypassed military channels entirely. If she could find his brother, convince him to carry a message, it was a long shot, but long shots were all she had left. Evelyn emerged from the alley and oriented herself. The merchant district was north of here, near the river docks. If Aldrin's brother still operated out of Harwick, she might be able to find him. She walked quickly but not frantically, keeping to the edges of crowds, avoiding the well-lit main streets. Her shoulder throbbed with every step, and she was fairly certain she'd bruised or cracked something when she hit that roof. But pain was just information. It told her she was alive. The merchant district was quieter this time of night. Most of the offices were closed, but warehouses along the river stayed active around the clock. Evelyn scanned the signs, looking for shipping companies, freight brokers, anyone who might know where to find a merchant named Aldrin. She found it in a tavern 2 blocks from the docks. The place was called the Trader's Rest, and it catered to the kind of men who moved cargo and asked few questions. Evelyn pushed through the door into warmth and noise and the smell of cheap whiskey. Dock workers and merchants filled the tables, arguing about rates and routes and the latest port regulations. She approached the bar, caught the keeper's eye. He was middle-aged, barrel-chested, with the look of someone who'd broken up too many fights. "I'm looking for Thomas Aldrin," she said quietly. The keeper studied her. "Why?" "I have a business proposition, time-sensitive." "Don't know anyone by that name." Evelyn pulled out a coin, one of her last, and set it on the bar. "That's unfortunate, because the person who directs me to him gets another one of these when I find him." The keeper's hand covered the coin. "He's usually at the Three Gulls warehouse this time of night, down by the East Pier. You'll know it by the blue lanterns." "Thank you." "Didn't do anything," the keeper said, pocketing the coin. "And you weren't here." The Three Gulls warehouse was exactly where he'd said. Blue lanterns hung at the entrance, casting strange shadows across stacked crates and idle loading equipment. Evelyn slipped inside through a side door that had been left ajar, following the sound of voices toward the back offices. She found Thomas Aldrin in a small counting room, bent over a ledger, while two other men argued about inventory discrepancies. He was older than his brother, maybe 60, with the same sharp eyes but weathered by years of commerce instead of command. Evelyn waited until the other men left, then stepped forward. "Mr. Aldrin?" He looked up, startled. "Office is closed. Come back in the morning." "I can't. I need you to get a message to your brother tonight." "My brother?" Thomas set down his pen slowly. "Lady, I don't know who you think. General Marcus Aldrin, commander of the Northern Forces. Your brother. And I have information he needs before the Rendall Pass deployment goes forward." Thomas's expression shifted from annoyed to cautious. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been trying to warn him that Duke Voss is about to get 300 soldiers killed through sheer incompetence, and someone who's running out of time to stop it." "You're the one who sent him those letters, the anonymous intelligence reports." Evelyn nodded. "Did he read them?" "He did. Brought them to me, actually, asking if I thought they were credible. I told him anyone who understood northern trade routes that well was worth listening to." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "He delayed the deployment, started asking questions, made Voss very angry." "Good. That's good. But the deployment's being pushed again, within days. And this time, Voss has framed me as a traitor to discredit anything I say. I need your brother to know that the intelligence is real, that the Highland Coalition is real, that if those soldiers march into Rendall Pass without diplomatic preparation, they'll be walking into an ambush. And you want me to carry this message because I'm being hunted, because official channels are compromised, because you're the only connection I have to someone who might actually stop this." Thomas studied her for a long moment. "You look like you've been running hard." "I jumped off a roof an hour ago." "That explains the way you're holding that shoulder. You know it's probably dislocated." "I know it hurts." "Sit down before you fall down." Thomas gestured to a chair, then moved to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle and 2 glasses. "Drink this. It'll help." "I don't need—" "It's medicinal, and you're about to tell me your whole story, so you might as well be comfortable." He poured 2 generous measures and pushed one across the desk. "Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." So Evelyn told him. Not everything. Some secrets were still hers alone, but enough. The years with Adrian, the stolen credit, the escape, the hunt, the consortium, the compromised safe house, all of it spilling out in a low, urgent voice while Thomas Aldrin listened without interrupting. When she finished, he drained his glass and reaffirmed it. "That's the most remarkable thing I've heard in 30 years of commerce. And I once met a man who smuggled diamonds inside dried fish. Will you help me?" "Helping you means going against a duke. That's not something done lightly. Helping me means saving your brother from making a catastrophic mistake based on Voss's bad intelligence. That should be enough." Thomas smiled grimly. "You're right, it should be." He stood, pulled on a coat. "Marcus is currently at the Northgate garrison, about 30 miles from here. I can get there by dawn if I leave now, but you can't come with me. You'd never make it past the sentries." "I'm not asking to come. I'm asking you to give him this." Evelyn pulled out the letter she'd intended to send Adrian and crossed out the name, rewriting it instead as a formal intelligence brief to General Aldrin. She added details about the tribal coalition, about the diplomatic contacts who might negotiate, about the specific failures in Voss's strategy. "Tell him it's from E. Hart. Tell him I have documentation proving every strategy attributed to Duke Voss for the past 5 years was actually my work. And tell him if he wants that documentation, if he wants proof that would force a War Council investigation, he needs to stop this deployment and grant me protection." "That's a bold ask." "It's a fair trade. He gets evidence that the Duke is a fraud. I get immunity from the warrant Voss is pushing for. Everyone wins except Adrian. And if Marcus doesn't believe you? Then soldiers die, and the Northern Territories erupt, and in 6 months everyone will be asking how the brilliant Duke Voss made such a fatal error in judgment. The truth will come out eventually. I'm just offering to speed up the timeline." Thomas folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside his coat. "Stay here. Use the back office. There's a cot, and you look like you need it. I'll lock up when I leave. Don't answer the door for anyone. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This might blow up in both our faces. He paused at the door. That shoulder really needs looking at. There's a medic kit in the bottom drawer. Do what you can. After he left, Evelyn found the medic kit and examined her shoulder as best she could. Definitely dislocated. She'd seen field injuries before, read enough medical texts to know the theory. Doing it to herself was different. She braced herself against the wall, took 3 deep breaths, and pulled. The pain was blinding, white hot. She bit down on a leather strap from the medic kit to keep from screaming. Something popped, shifted, settled. The pain receded from unbearable to merely agonizing. Good enough. She wrapped the shoulder as tightly as she could manage, swallowed 2 pills from an unlabeled bottle that she hoped were for pain, and collapsed onto the cot. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams of falling and shouting, and Adrian's face twisted with rage. Thomas returned at noon the next day. Evelyn jerked awake at the sound of the door, hand reaching for the knife she'd lost somewhere between the rooftop and the alley. Easy. It's me. Thomas set a package on the desk. Food. You look like you haven't eaten in days. What did he say? Marcus wants to meet with you, in person, tonight. Evelyn sat up too quickly, and her shoulder protested. Where? Neutral ground, an old monastery 15 miles north of here. It's abandoned, isolated. He'll come alone, but he's making no promises until he hears your full case. That's fair. It's also dangerous. If this is a trap, if Voss has gotten to Marcus somehow, you'll be walking into an arrest. I know, but staying here is just as dangerous, and at least this way I'm moving forward instead of just hiding. Thomas pulled out a map and marked the location. There's a horse tied up behind the warehouse. She's old but steady. Can you ride with that shoulder? I'll manage. You'll have to. Monastery's off the main roads. Follow the river north until you see the old mill, then cut east through the forest. You can't miss it. It's the only stone structure for miles. Evelyn studied the map, memorizing the route. If it goes wrong, I was never here and we never spoke. That's the price of this kind of help. Deniability. Understood. One more thing. Thomas pulled a small pistol from his desk drawer. It's loaded. 4 rounds. I'm not asking if you know how to use it. I'm telling you to take it anyway. Evelyn took the weapon. It was heavier than she expected, cold and solid in her hand. She'd never fired a gun before, never needed to, but the weight of it was somehow reassuring. Thank you, Thomas. For everything. Save it for after you survive the meeting. And for what it's worth, I think you're right. About Voss, about the deployment, about all of it. Marcus won't admit it easily, but he's had doubts about the Duke's recent decisions. You might be giving him the evidence he needs to act on those doubts. The ride north was harder than she'd anticipated. The horse was indeed old, and every jolt sent pain lancing through Evelyn's shoulder. But she pushed on, following the river as the sun tracked across the sky, turning the water gold and then orange and finally deep purple as evening approached. She found the monastery just as darkness settled. It rose from the forest like a ghost of better times. Stone walls half collapsed, empty windows staring blind at the sky. A single light flickered in what had once been the main chapel. Evelyn dismounted carefully and tied the horse to a tree. The pistol was tucked in her belt, hidden under her jacket. The satchel with the portfolio was strapped across her body, everything she needed to make her case or defend herself if this went wrong. She approached the chapel entrance slowly, every sense alert. The door was open. Inside, candles cast wavering shadows across broken pews, and a floor littered with leaves and debris. A man stood near what had once been the altar. Tall, gray-haired, wearing a military uniform stripped of insignia. General Marcus Aldrin. Miss Hart, I presume. His voice was measured, careful. Or should I call you Lady Voss? Evelyn is fine. Evelyn, then. You've been causing quite a disturbance. The Duke is very anxious to find you. I'm sure he is. Did Thomas give you my letter? He did. I read it, twice. Aldrin moved closer, his boots crunching on debris. You make extraordinary claims about Duke Voss, claims that would destroy his career if they were proven true. They are true, and I can prove them. I'm listening. Evelyn pulled out the portfolio and set it on a relatively stable section of a broken pew. 5 years of documentation. Strategy briefs, intelligence analyses, Military plans? All in my handwriting, all dated, all corresponding to operations that were publicly credited to Adrian Voss. Compare the writing to his. Compare the analytical style. Have your own intelligence officers examine them. You'll see what I see. Aldrin picked up the portfolio, flipped through pages slowly. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. These are comprehensive. I built everything he is. Every victory he claims started in this portfolio or one like it. The Kestrel Accord, the Eastern Trade Embargo, the Northern Containment Strategy, all mine. Why didn't you take credit at the time? Because I was his wife. Because I believed we were partners. Because I was naive enough to think that giving him success would eventually lead to him seeing me as an equal. Evelyn's voice hardened. I was wrong. Aldrin continued reading, his frown deepening. The Rendell Pass analysis. You sent me warnings about this deployment. I did. Because Voss doesn't understand the tribal dynamics. He thinks military force will intimidate them into submission, but it'll do the opposite. They'll unite against a common threat. And your soldiers will be caught in a pass with limited supply lines and no reinforcement options. It'll be a massacre. And you're certain about this? I've been studying Northern politics for 3 years. I've corresponded with tribal mediators. I know their leadership, their grievances, their breaking points. What Voss is planning will push them past that point. Aldrin closed the portfolio carefully. If what you're showing me is genuine, and I'm not saying I believe it yet, but if it is, then Duke Voss has been committing fraud on a scale that would require a full investigation, accusations of stolen valor, misrepresentation to the crown, possibly treason if he's made strategic decisions based on insufficient understanding and gotten people killed as a result. Yes, that's an enormous accusation to level against a peer of the realm. I'm aware. And you want what exactly? Immunity? Protection? I want him to stop hunting me. I want the warrant withdrawn. And I want recognition that my intelligence on Rendell Pass is accurate, so those soldiers don't die for his ego. Aldrin was quiet for a long time, studying her face in the candlelight. You're asking me to go against the Duke, against the War Council, against established hierarchy and protocol. I'm asking you to do your job, which is protecting soldiers and making sound strategic decisions based on accurate intelligence. You're very bold for a woman with a dislocated shoulder and a price on her head. I'm very tired of being invisible while incompetent men take credit for my work and then threaten to destroy me when I object. Aldrin almost smiled. Fair enough. He tucked the portfolio under his arm. I need to verify these documents. Have my people examine them properly. That will take time. How much time? 3 days? Maybe 4. In the meantime, the Rendell deployment is scheduled to begin in 2 days. I can delay it, claim I need additional intelligence review. That will buy us time, but it'll also put me in Voss's crosshairs. He's already suspicious of you. He knows you delayed the deployment once based on my anonymous warnings. Then he won't be surprised when I delay it again. But this time, I'll need concrete reasons. Official objections. Aldrin pulled out a small notepad and pencil. Tell me everything you know about the Highland Coalition. Names, positions, grievances, potential negotiation points. If I'm going to make a case for diplomatic engagement instead of military force, I need details. They talked for 2 hours. Evelyn laying out everything she knew about Northern politics, tribal structures, key mediators. Aldrin taking notes, asking sharp questions, pressing for sources and verification. It felt like being tested, examined, but also, strangely, like being taken seriously. Like her intelligence had value because of what it was, not because of whose name was attached to it. Finally, Aldrin put away his notepad. If even half of what you're telling me is accurate, Voss's deployment plan is worse than I thought. But I can't act on your word alone. I need third-party verification. From who? There's a diplomatic attaché who's worked in the Northern Territories for 15 years, Sylvia Brennan. She's known for being honest even when it's inconvenient. If I bring her your analysis and she confirms it, that gives me the leverage I need to argue against Voss. Will she help? She will if the intelligence is good. Brennan cares about preventing conflict, not protecting egos, which makes her unusual in government circles. Aldrin handed back the portfolio. Keep this safe. I'll need it as evidence if we move forward with an investigation. But first, let's stop a war. What do you need from me? Stay hidden. Don't contact anyone. Don't try to send more letters. Just stay alive for the next few days while I build the case." He paused. "And for what it's worth, I believe you. I've had concerns about Voss's recent decisions. The way he speaks about strategy doesn't match the depth of the written briefs. I thought maybe he had advisors who did the real work, but I never imagined it was his own wife doing everything while he took credit. I'm not his wife anymore." "No, I suppose you're not." Aldrin moved toward the door, then stopped. "There's an old gamekeeper's cottage about 2 miles west of here, empty for years, but the roof's intact and there's a well. You'll be safe there while I work. I'll send Thomas with food and updates every other day." "Thank you, General." "Don't thank me until this is over. We're about to challenge a duke. That's not something that ends quietly." After Aldrin left, Evelyn remained in the ruined chapel for a while, letting the silence settle. She'd done it. Made contact with someone who had the authority and the will to actually stop Adrian, someone who believed her. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was the first real crack in Adrian's armor. She found the gamekeeper's cottage exactly where Aldrin said it would be. Small, isolated, surrounded by forest. Inside was bare but functional. A stone fireplace, a rough wooden bed frame, a table and chair. The well water was cold and clean. Evelyn built a small fire and sat watching the flames, her mind already moving to the next phase. Aldrin would verify her intelligence. He'd build the case. And when he had enough evidence, he'd bring it before the War Council. But Adrian wouldn't wait passively for that to happen. He'd escalate, push harder. Maybe try to force the deployment before objections could be formalized, which meant she needed to be ready for his next move. 2 days later, Thomas arrived with supplies and news. Marcus met with Brennan. She confirmed everything you said about the Highland Coalition, gave him names of specific tribal leaders who've been stockpiling weapons and coordinating movements. She's preparing a formal diplomatic assessment that recommends immediate negotiation instead of military deployment. Evelyn exhaled slowly. "That's good. That's exactly what we needed. Gets better." Marcus presented Brennan's assessment to 3 other generals, not the full War Council, he's being careful, but enough to build support. 2 of them agreed the deployment should be postponed indefinitely. The 3rd is still loyal to Voss, but he's outvoted. So the deployment stopped? Not officially, but it's stalled. Voss tried to push it through yesterday and was blocked. He's furious, demanding emergency council sessions, threatening investigations into who's undermining his authority. Thomas set a bundle of newspapers on the table. He's also losing support in other ways. Read those. Evelyn unfolded the papers. The headlines made her pulse quicken. Questions raised about Duke's strategic record. War Council delays northern deployment amid diplomatic concerns. Anonymous intelligence source proves more accurate than official assessment. The articles were careful, avoiding direct accusations. But between the lines, the message was clear. Duke Voss's judgment was being questioned, his recent decisions scrutinized. The infallible strategist suddenly looked fallible. "The letter I published about Rendell Pass," Evelyn said quietly. "People are taking it seriously. More than seriously. Journalists are digging into Voss's other strategies, looking for patterns. Some are noticing that his best work all happened in the last 5 years. Before that, his record was competent, but not brilliant. Now people are asking what changed. They're starting to see the pattern. They're starting to ask the right questions, which is making Voss desperate." Thomas pulled out another paper. This one a government notice. "He's doubled the reward for information leading to your capture. 10,000 crowns. That's serious money, enough to make even loyal people reconsider." Evelyn stared at the notice. Her face wasn't on it. They didn't have a recent image of her, but the description was accurate enough. Height, age, dark hair, likely traveling alone. "I need to change my appearance." "Way ahead of you." Thomas pulled scissors and a bottle of dye from his pack. "Courtesy of my wife. She says if you're going to hide, hide properly." An hour later, Evelyn's hair was short and dyed a reddish brown that made her look like a completely different person. She studied herself in the small mirror Thomas had brought, barely recognizing the woman staring back. "That'll do," Thomas said. "Now you look like a shopkeeper or a clerk. Nothing remarkable." "Good. Remarkable got me hunted." "Marcus wants to meet again. 3 days from now. Same monastery. He'll have the full verification report by then, and he wants to discuss next steps." "What kind of next steps?" The kind where you might actually get your life back, or at least a version of it that doesn't involve running forever. Thomas headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you're going to win this. Marcus is thorough, and he doesn't like being lied to. Once he proves Voss has been committing fraud, the Duke's finished. After Thomas left, Evelyn spent 3 days in the cottage, reading and rereading her notes, preparing for every possible outcome of the meeting with Aldrin. The evening of the third day, she returned to the monastery. This time, Aldrin wasn't alone. The woman with him was perhaps 40, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. She wore civilian clothes, but carried herself like someone used to authority. "Evelyn Hart," Aldrin said. "This is Sylvia Brennan, diplomatic attaché for the Northern Territories." Brennan stepped forward, studying Evelyn with open curiosity. "You're the woman who's been sending anonymous intelligence reports, the one Duke Voss is frantically trying to find." "That's me." "Good. Because I need to know if you're brilliant or insane, possibly both." Brennan pulled out a folder. "I've reviewed your analysis of the Highland Coalition, your predictions about their response to military pressure, your recommendations for diplomatic engagement, and I have one question. Where did you learn all this?" "From 3 years of correspondence with Northern mediators, trade reports, cultural studies, and pattern analysis of historical tribal responses to external threats, while being the Duke's wife. While being invisible in the Duke's household. People say things in front of invisible women. They don't guard their words. They don't realize we're listening, analyzing, remembering." Brennan smiled slightly. "I like you, and I can confirm that everything you told General Aldrin is accurate. The Highland Coalition is real, organized, and ready to respond to military incursion with coordinated force. If Voss's deployment had gone forward, we'd be looking at hundreds of casualties on both sides. And now? Now we have a chance to prevent it." Aldrin pulled out the portfolio Evelyn had given him. "I've had 3 separate handwriting experts examine these documents. All 3 confirm they're in your hand, not Voss's. The analytical style, the specific terminology, the way strategic problems are approached, it's all consistent across 5 years of documentation. And it's notably different from Voss's known writing style. Which means? Which means I can prove Duke Adrian Voss has been claiming credit for work done by his wife. That's fraud. Professional misconduct, possibly criminal depending on how it's framed." Aldrin's expression was grim. "I'm taking this to the War Council. Tomorrow. Full formal presentation with documentation." Evelyn's heart hammered. "What will happen? There'll be an investigation. Voss will be questioned. His strategies will be reviewed. If the evidence holds, and it will, he'll be stripped of his position on the War Council, probably his military commissions, possibly his title, depending on how angry the Crown gets about being deceived. And the warrant for my arrest will be withdrawn immediately once the fraud is exposed. You can't be arrested for stealing work that was yours to begin with. It was happening, actually happening. Adrian's house of cards was collapsing." "There's one problem," Brennan said quietly. "Voss knows he's losing control of the narrative, which makes him unpredictable, dangerous. Men like him don't accept defeat gracefully." "What do you think he'll do?" "I think he'll try one last desperate move to discredit you before the investigation makes his guilt obvious. And if I were him, I'd—" The sound of horses outside cut her off. Multiple riders, approaching fast. Aldrin's hand went to his sidearm. "That's not Thomas." The monastery doors crashed open. 6 men poured in, wearing Voss colors, carrying weapons. And behind them, silhouetted against the fading light, stood Adrian himself. He looked different than Evelyn remembered. Thinner, lines carved deep around his mouth and eyes, desperate. "Hello, Evelyn," he said. "I think it's time we had that conversation." Time crystallized in that moment. Adrian in the doorway, backlit by twilight. 6 armed men fanning out across the ruined chapel. Aldrin's hand on his weapon. Brennan stepping protectively in front of Evelyn. And Evelyn herself, standing absolutely still, watching the man she'd built and abandoned walk toward her like he still had the right. "Lower your weapons," Aldrin said, his voice carrying command. "I'm a general of the realm. You have no authority here." "I have every authority." Adrian's voice was raw, frayed at the edges. "That woman is wanted for theft of state secrets. I'm executing a lawful arrest." "There is no lawful arrest. The warrant hasn't been approved by the Crown." "It will be. Tomorrow. The council votes at dawn." Adrian's eyes never left Evelyn. But I'm not waiting for bureaucracy. Not when she's here. Right now, with the evidence I need to bury. Evelyn felt Brennan tense beside her, but she stepped out from behind the diplomat's protection. She'd spent 5 years being shielded, hidden, made invisible. Not anymore. "Hello, Adrian?" He flinched, just slightly, as if her voice was a blade he hadn't expected to still cut. "You've made everything very difficult, Evelyn. I gave you everything. A title, a home, respect. You gave me a cage and called it a palace. You took my work and called it yours. And when I left, you tried to have me declared insane rather than admit you couldn't function without me. You stole classified documents. You leaked intelligence to undermine military operations. You're a traitor. I'm the author. You're the plagiarist." Evelyn took a step forward, and Adrian's men shifted nervously. "Every strategy you've claimed for 5 years came from me. The evidence is right there." She nodded toward the portfolio in Aldrin's hands. "Dated, documented, proven. Lies, forgeries." But Adrian's voice lacked conviction. He knew what was in that portfolio. He'd signed his name to every page of her work. "Then let's test them," Aldrin said. "Right here. Right now. I'll ask you both the same strategic questions. We'll see whose answers match the documented analysis." Adrian's jaw tightened. "This isn't a game, General. This is about national security. About a woman who's compromised military operations because she couldn't accept her place." "Her place?" Brennan's voice was sharp as broken glass. "Her place was doing the work you took credit for while you paraded around accepting medals. I've seen the documents, Voss. I've read her analysis of the Northern Territories. It's better than anything I've seen from official channels in 15 years. Better than anything you've ever produced." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You're a fraud. And now you're desperate enough to show up here with armed men because you know the truth is about to destroy you." Adrian's composure cracked. "I built this career. I earned my position. She was supposed to support me, not compete with me." "I never competed with you," Evelyn said quietly. "I built you, Adrian. I made you brilliant because I thought we were partners. I believed you when you said my work mattered, even if it couldn't be public. I believed we were creating something together." "We were." "No, you were taking. I was giving. And when I realized the difference, when I finally saw that you'd planned to erase me completely, I left. That's not treason. That's survival. You destroyed me." The words came out strangled. "Everything's falling apart. The council questions every decision. The deployment's been blocked. People are asking—" He stopped, breathing hard. "They're asking questions I can't answer. Because you never understood the work well enough to defend it. You just presented my conclusions and hoped no one would dig deeper." Evelyn felt something shift inside her. Not anger, not even satisfaction. Just clarity. "You made yourself dependent on someone you treated as invisible. That's not my failure, Adrian. It's yours." Adrian stared at her, and for a moment she saw past the desperation to something older. Grief, maybe. Or the dawning realization that the person he'd dismissed had been the only thing holding him together. "Come back," he said, and the words sounded like they'd been dragged out of him. "Come back and we'll fix this. Work together. Properly this time. I'll credit you. Publicly. We'll tell them you were my advisor, my strategist. No more hiding." "Why would I do that?" "Because you need me too. You need my name, my position, my access. You're nobody without that. Just a woman with ideas that no one will listen to because you don't have rank or title or—" "Adrian," Evelyn's voice cut through his. "I've been nobody without you for 3 weeks. In that time, I've sent intelligence that prevented a massacre. I've built relationships with people who value my work for what it is. I've proven that my analysis is better than yours, and everyone who matters is starting to see it. I don't need you. I never did. You needed me, and you still can't admit it." Silence filled the chapel. Even Adrian's men looked uncomfortable, their weapons lowering slightly as they realized they were watching something break that had been dying for years. "If you don't come back," Adrian said slowly, "I'll make sure you never work in strategy again. I'll destroy any reputation you try to build. I'll use every connection I have to shut you out of—" "You'll do nothing." Aldrin's voice was flat, final. "Because tomorrow morning, I'm presenting evidence to the War Council that proves Duke Adrian Voss has been committing professional fraud for 5 years. Your connections won't help you. Your title won't protect you. You'll be too busy defending yourself to attack anyone. Adrian turned to Aldrin and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. You're making a mistake, General. The Council won't believe her over me. I'm a Duke. I'm a war hero. She's the person who actually wrote the strategies that made you a war hero. And I have proof. Aldrin held up the portfolio. 5 years of documentation. 3 handwriting experts confirming authenticity. Testimony from a decorated diplomatic attaché confirming the intelligence is accurate. And a living, breathing woman who can answer detailed questions about her own work while you can't explain the reasoning behind decisions you supposedly made. Those documents could have been fabricated, planted. She's had weeks to... Stop. Brennan's voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent decades cutting through political nonsense. I've read those documents, Voss. I've compared them to your known writing. The complexity of the analysis, the depth of understanding, the specific terminology, it's beyond your capability. Anyone with expertise in Northern politics can see that. You can't fake that kind of knowledge. You can only steal it. Adrian's face went white, then red. His hands clenched. For a moment, Evelyn thought he might actually become violent. His men thought so too. They shifted closer, hands on weapons. But Adrian just stood there, shaking slightly, as reality settled over him like a shroud. You've destroyed everything, he said to Evelyn. Everything I worked for. Everything I built. Everything I built, she corrected gently. You just wore it. And now you'll have to figure out who you are without it. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it. No words came. Maybe because there were no words left. Maybe because he finally understood that this conversation was over, and he'd lost it the moment it began. Leave, Aldrin said. Take your men and go. If you're not gone in 60 seconds, I'll have you arrested for threatening a general and interfering with an official investigation. You don't have the authority. Try me. Adrian looked at Evelyn one last time. She met his gaze steadily, letting him see what he'd never bothered to look for before. The intelligence, the strength, the absolute refusal to disappear just because he wanted her gone. Then he turned and walked out, his men following like shadows of a power that no longer existed. The silence after they left felt enormous. Evelyn's legs suddenly didn't want to hold her. She sat down hard on a broken pew, her hands shaking. Well, Brennan said, that was dramatic. He'll try something else. Evelyn's voice came out rough. He's not the kind of man who accepts defeat. He'll find another way to... He'll do nothing. Aldrin sat down beside her, his expression tired but certain. Because by the time he figures out what to do next, the investigation will be public. The evidence will be presented, and the only question the council will have is whether to strip him of his title immediately or wait until after the formal hearing. You're sure? I'm sure. I've been in politics long enough to know when someone's position is untenable. Voss is finished, not because you destroyed him, because he destroyed himself the moment he decided to build a career on stolen work. Brennan pulled out a flask and took a long drink before passing it to Evelyn. What will you do now? After tomorrow, when this goes public, you'll have a choice. Stay anonymous or step forward and claim your work. Evelyn took a drink. The liquor burned, grounding her. If I stay anonymous, I stay safe. No scandal, no public examination, no questions about why I stayed silent so long. But you also stay invisible, Brennan said, and I get the sense you're done being invisible. If I step forward, I become the story, the wife who brought down a duke. Every decision I make will be analyzed through that lens. For a while, yes, but eventually you'll just be Evelyn Hart, strategic analyst, the woman who understood Northern politics better than anyone in government, the person who prevented a war. Brennan sat down on Evelyn's other side. I could use someone like that on my team, officially, with a salary and a title and actual credit for the work. Evelyn looked at her. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you this job you should have had 5 years ago, diplomatic intelligence analyst for the Northern Territories. You'd work directly with me, report to the Foreign Office, and have complete autonomy over your analysis. No one steals credit. No one makes you invisible. You do the work, you sign your name, and everyone knows it's yours. I'm about to be at the center of a massive scandal, which makes you perfect for government work. We specialize in scandal. Brennan smiled. But seriously, you have expertise we need. The Northern Territories are still unstable. The Highland Coalition is still a threat. We need someone who understands the situation well enough to help us navigate it. That someone is you. What about the consortium? Evelyn looked at Aldrin. Varen's people helped me. I can't just abandon that arrangement. Varen's people helped themselves, Aldrin said dryly. They wanted your intelligence because it helps their business interests. There's nothing wrong with that. It's how the world works. But you don't owe them exclusivity. Contract work for Brennan's office, freelance for the consortium when it doesn't conflict. Everyone wins. Evelyn turned the flask in her hands, thinking. A month ago, she'd been Lady Voss, invisible and erased. Now she was being offered a position where her work would matter, where her name would mean something. I'll need guarantees, written contracts, protections that ensure I can't be pushed out or made invisible again. Done, Brennan said immediately. I'll have the paperwork drawn up tomorrow, after the council meeting. And Adrian, what happens to him? That's not up to us, Aldrin said. The council will investigate. The Crown will make a determination. But my guess? He'll be stripped of his military positions, possibly his title depending on how much pressure the Crown wants to apply. He'll lose access to official channels and state secrets, and he'll spend the rest of his life explaining how he thought he could claim credit for work he didn't do. He'll survive, Evelyn said quietly. Men like Adrian always survive. They find new masks to wear, new people to use. He'll reinvent himself as the wronged husband, the victim of a scheming wife. Some people will believe him. Some people always believe the comfortable lie, Brennan agreed. But the people who matter, the ones making decisions about strategy and policy, they'll know the truth, and that's what counts. Evelyn handed back the flask and stood. Her shoulder still hurt, her body was exhausted, but her mind was clear. I want to be at the council meeting tomorrow, when you present the evidence. Aldrin shook his head. That's not a good idea. It could look like you're there to gloat, or to influence the proceedings. I don't care how it looks. Adrian spent 5 years making me invisible. Tomorrow, when his fraud is exposed, I want him to see me. I want him to know that I'm not a ghost he can erase. I'm the person who built him and then walked away when he tried to bury me. That's risky. Everything about this has been risky. One more risk won't kill me. Brennan laughed. I like her. She can sit with the diplomatic observers. That gives her official standing without making it look personal. It is personal, Evelyn said. Of course it is. But we don't have to advertise that. The War Council chambers were ancient and imposing, all dark wood and formal banners and portraits of past commanders staring down with judgment. Evelyn sat in the observers' gallery, wearing a borrowed dress that actually fit, her short dyed hair making her look professional instead of desperate. The gallery was half full. Diplomats, military liaisons, a few journalists who'd been granted access. None of them recognized her. She was just another observer taking notes, watching power shift. Adrian sat at the main table with 4 other council members, his uniform perfect, his expression controlled. He hadn't seen her yet. Or maybe he had and was pretending he hadn't. General Aldrin stood to present his findings. Gentlemen, Lady Council Member, I've called this emergency session to address concerns about strategic intelligence attributed to Duke Adrian Voss. Over the past several weeks, I've received anonymous intelligence regarding Northern territorial operations, intelligence that proved more accurate than official assessments. This raised questions about the sources of our strategic planning. He opened the portfolio, Evelyn's portfolio, her work, finally being seen by people who could understand its value. What I discovered was that the majority of military strategies credited to Duke Voss over the past 5 years were not authored by him. They were written by Evelyn Hartwell Voss, his wife, working in an unofficial capacity without credit or compensation. The room erupted, council members shouting questions, Adrian standing, his face frozen, journalists scribbling frantically. That's absurd, Adrian's voice cut through the noise. My wife she has no military training, no official standing. She's not capable of. She's eminently capable. Aldrin's voice was iron. I have 5 years of documented evidence, strategy briefs in her handwriting, intelligence analyses that match her writing style, not yours, and testimony from diplomatic personnel confirming that her understanding of Northern politics exceeds anyone currently employed by the government. He began laying out the evidence, page after page, comparison of handwriting, analysis of writing style, dates and signatures, and the unmistakable pattern of stolen credit. Adrian tried to interrupt, tried to argue that the documents were forgeries, that Evelyn had mental instabilities, that this was a personal vendetta. No one was listening, because the evidence was too clear, too comprehensive, too damning. One of the other council members, an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, picked up several pages and read them carefully. Then she looked at Adrian. Duke Voss, can you explain the strategic reasoning behind the Kestrel Accord's supply line restructuring? Adrian blinked. The supply line restructuring was necessary because of the terrain challenges and specifically, what terrain challenges? The mountain passes in the eastern sector there are no mountain passes in the eastern sector. The Kestrel Accord dealt with coastal regions. The council member set down the papers. You don't actually know the details of this strategy, do you? Adrian's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Let me ask you another, the woman continued. The Northern Containment Plan, what was your primary consideration for tribal response patterns? Silence. Duke Voss. I had advisors the details were handled by your wife, who you claim was merely a social companion with no involvement in strategic matters. The council member looked at Aldrin. This is fraud. Clear, documented fraud. How many operations were compromised because Duke Voss didn't actually understand the strategies he was implementing? None, fortunately, because Lady Voss's work was sound, but the Rendall Pass deployment would have been catastrophic. Duke Voss pushed for military escalation that directly contradicted the intelligence his wife had provided. If that deployment had proceeded, we'd be looking at mass casualties. Another council member leaned forward. Where is Lady Voss now? She's been in hiding. Duke Voss attempted to have her declared mentally unfit and institutionalized when she left him. He also requested a warrant for her arrest on false charges of stealing state secrets, secrets that were actually her own work. Is she willing to testify? Aldrin glanced up at the gallery, directly at Evelyn. She is. Every head in the chamber turned. Evelyn stood slowly, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes, including Adrian's. His face when he saw her was everything she'd hoped and feared. Shock, recognition, the dawning realization that she wasn't just present, she was about to speak. Lady Voss, the gray-haired council member said. Or do you prefer another name? Evelyn Hart. That's the name I've been using. Miss Hart, then. Can you confirm that you authored the strategies attributed to Duke Voss? I can. I have documentation, dates, drafts. Everything General Aldrin showed you is authentic. Why didn't you take credit at the time? Because I was the Duke's wife. Because I believed we were working together. Because I didn't realize he was presenting my work as entirely his own until it was too late to object without destroying both of us. And when you discovered the truth, I left. I tried to do it quietly, but Duke Voss attempted to have me declared incompetent to prevent me from revealing his fraud. So I defended myself. I sent anonymous intelligence to prevent military disasters. I documented my authorship, and I waited for people in authority to see the truth. People like General Aldrin. Yes, ma'am. The council member studied her for a long moment. Then, you've put us in a difficult position, Miss Hart. The strategies you wrote have been the foundation of our northern policy for 5 years. If we acknowledge that Duke Voss stole credit, we also acknowledge that our entire command structure failed to notice. That's embarrassing. With respect, ma'am, my work being good isn't what's embarrassing. What's embarrassing is that a Duke was able to claim credit for work he didn't do for 5 years because no one thought to question whether his wife might be more than decorative. Someone in the gallery laughed, quickly suppressed, but genuine. The council member smiled slightly. You're right, that is the embarrassing part. She turned to Adrian. Duke Voss, do you have anything to say in your defense? Adrian stood, his hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was still controlled. Still trying. My wife is intelligent. I never denied that. She helped with research, with background information, but the strategic thinking, the actual decisions, those were mine. She may have contributed, but stop. Evelyn's voice cut through his. I didn't contribute, Adrian. I created. Every word, every plan, every decision you claimed was yours came from me. And you know it. You've always known it. That's not... Ask him about the cipher system, Evelyn said to the council. The communication network redesign he claimed revolutionized military intelligence. Ask him to explain how polymorphic substitution with temporal keying actually works. The gray-haired council member looked at Adrian. Well, Duke Voss? It's a complex system. The technical details aren't something I can explain in simple terms. I'm not asking for simple terms. I'm asking for the technical explanation. Adrian's face went red. I had engineers who implemented the details. You had your wife who designed the system from scratch, who wrote the implementation instructions that your engineers followed, who created something so sophisticated that even the people using it don't fully understand how it works. The council member closed the folder in front of her. I've heard enough. Duke Adrian Voss, you are hereby suspended from the War Council pending a full investigation into allegations of professional fraud and misrepresentation. Your military commissions are revoked. Your access to classified intelligence is terminated immediately. This council will determine whether further sanctions are warranted. Adrian slumped in his chair. Not dramatically, just a slow collapse, like a puppet with cut strings. Miss Hart, the council member continued, you'll be required to provide full testimony for the investigation. Are you willing? I am. Good. And Miss Hart, thank you for the work you did. Even if you didn't receive credit at the time, it was valuable. It saved lives. We won't forget that. Something in Evelyn's chest loosened. Not victory, not exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement that her work had mattered, had value, independent of Adrian's name. One more thing, another council member said. The warrant Duke Voss requested for your arrest, it's withdrawn. You're free to move openly without fear of detention. Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. The session ended. Council members filed out, already discussing next steps. Journalists rushed for doors, eager to break the story. And Adrian sat alone at the table, staring at nothing. Evelyn made her way down from the gallery. Aldrin and Brennan were waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Well, Brennan said, that went better than expected. Did it? You're free. He's finished. And you've been publicly acknowledged as the actual author of 5 years of military strategy. I'd call that a win. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like survival, Aldrin said quietly, which is better than the alternative. Evelyn looked back toward the chamber. Adrian was being escorted out by officials, his perfect uniform looking somehow diminished now. He glanced in her direction, and their eyes met one last time. She didn't look away, didn't flinch, just met his gaze steadily until he was the one who turned away. What happens now? She asked. Now you rebuild, Brennan said. Not your life with him. A new life. Your own. 3 months later, Evelyn stood in a small office in the diplomatic quarter, surrounded by maps and reports and legitimate work that carried her real name. The investigation had concluded. Adrian had been stripped of his duchy. That had taken an act of the crown. But the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. He'd retired to a minor estate in the southern provinces, out of public view, out of power. Evelyn had heard he was writing his memoirs, trying to rehabilitate his reputation. She didn't care enough to read them. The scandal had been enormous. Every newspaper in the realm had covered it. The duke who stole his wife's genius, the woman who brought down her husband, the fraud that had lasted 5 years. It had been exhausting, humiliating at times. Journalists asking invasive questions, society figures offering false sympathy while clearly savoring the gossip. But it had also been liberating, because for the first time in her adult life, Evelyn's name was attached to her work. Her intelligence was credited to her. Her analysis stood on its own merit. She was Evelyn Hart now, officially. She'd reclaimed her maiden name legally, severing the last tie to Adrian Voss. And she was good at her job. The Northern Territories were still complicated, still volatile, but the diplomatic approach she'd advocated was working. Tribal leaders were talking instead of fighting. Trade was stabilizing. The disaster Rendall Pass would have been had been avoided. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in. Sylvia Brennan entered, carrying a folder. New intelligence from the Highland Coalition. They're requesting a formal meeting to discuss long-term trade agreements. Your analysis was right. They wanted to be heard, not fought. That's good news. It's better than good. It's the foundation for actual peace in the region. Brennan set the folder down. There's something else. The consortium, Varen's people, They've been asking if you're still available for contract work. What kind of work? The kind that pays well and doesn't ask too many questions. You've built a reputation now, Evelyn, not just as the woman who brought down a duke, as someone who actually understands how power moves, how systems work, how to see 3 steps ahead when everyone else is stuck on the current move. I'm not interested in going back to being invisible. You won't be. They want you specifically because you're not invisible anymore. Because when Evelyn Hart signs an intelligence assessment, people know it's legitimate. Evelyn considered this. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Brennan turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you left him. Not just because we got a good analyst out of it, because you deserve better than being someone's uncredited ghost. After Brennan left, Evelyn returned to her maps. She had a meeting with tribal mediators next week, a presentation to the Foreign Office the week after, a life that was complicated and challenging and entirely hers. She thought about Adrian sometimes, wondered if he'd figured out how to function without her, wondered if he understood yet that the problem hadn't been her leaving, it had been him never seeing her in the first place. But mostly, she didn't think about him at all, because she was too busy building something new, something where her work belonged to her, where her intelligence had value because of who she was, not who she'd married, where being seen wasn't a risk, it was just the truth. Evelyn Hart stood at her window, looking out at the city she'd almost lost herself in, and smiled. She'd been the invisible power behind a duke's throne. Now she was just powerful, and invisible to no one. The diplomatic quarters were hosting a reception that evening, something about trade agreements and northern policy. Evelyn normally avoided these events, but Brennan had insisted. You need to be seen, she'd said, not as the scandal, as the expert. So Evelyn went, wearing a dress she'd chosen herself, deep green, elegant, but not ostentatious. Her hair had grown out slightly from the emergency dye job, settling into a color that was almost natural. She looked like herself. Finally, the reception hall was full of the usual suspects, diplomats, military liaisons, a few council members. Evelyn moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations on her recent analysis, discussing potential strategies for Highland negotiations. People sought her out now, asked her opinion, listened when she spoke. It was strange, wonderful, still slightly unnerving. Miss Hart, she turned. Lady Marguerite Thorne stood behind her, wearing burgundy and a knowing smile. Lady Thorne, I didn't expect to see you here. I wouldn't miss it. I wanted to see how you were doing, really doing, not the official version. Evelyn considered the question honestly. I'm adjusting. It's different being visible, being credited. Sometimes I still catch myself downplaying my own work, making it smaller, safer. Old habits. Those habits kept you alive in an impossible situation. Don't regret them, but don't let them define you now. Thorne took a glass of wine from a passing servant and handed it to Evelyn. I have a confession. I'm the one who told Varen about you. I'm the mutual acquaintance he mentioned in that first letter. I suspected. Are you angry? No, you gave me options when I had none. That's not something to be angry about. Evelyn paused. Why did you help me? Because I saw myself in you. 30 years ago, I was married to a man who thought my intelligence was decorative. When he died, I discovered I could finally use my mind without permission. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Thorne's eyes were distant. I couldn't save myself. I got lucky with widowhood, but I could help you save yourself, so I did. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't waste it. You have a chance to build something real, Evelyn, something that matters. Don't let fear or old habits make you smaller than you are. After Thorne drifted away, Evelyn stood by the window, watching the city lights reflect on the river. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, Lady Voss, invisible and erased. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, jumping across rooftops, desperate and alone. And she thought about who she was now. Not perfect, not without scars, but free, visible, her own. The portfolio that had been her evidence was now archived in the War Council's records. Public record. Anyone could request to see it, to verify that the strategies attributed to Adrian Voss had actually come from Evelyn Hart. The truth was documented, preserved, undeniable. She'd won. Not the way she'd imagined when she first crawled through that drainage culvert, not cleanly or easily or without cost. But she'd won. Adrian had lost his title, his position, his reputation, and Evelyn had gained hers. The balance had shifted, power had changed hands, and this time when she held it in her own name. Evelyn finished her wine and returned to the reception. She had people to meet, connections to build, work to do. Real work. Work that mattered. She wasn't Lady Voss anymore. She wasn't anyone's invisible asset. She was Evelyn Hart, strategic analyst, expert on Northern territorial politics, the woman who'd built a duke and then walked away when he tried to bury her. And she was just getting started. Across the city, in a small rented room, Adrian Voss sat at a desk, staring at blank paper. He'd been trying to write for hours, trying to reconstruct the strategies he'd claimed were his, trying to prove he was more than just the face on someone else's work. The paper stayed blank, because brilliance can't be borrowed forever. Eventually the mask slips, the facade cracks, and what's underneath is just a man who never understood that the person he'd made invisible was the only reason anyone had ever seen him at all. Adrian set down his pen and closed his eyes, and in the diplomatic quarters, Evelyn Hart smiled and moved forward into a future that belonged only to her. The weapon had left the battlefield, and she'd taken all the ammunition with her.